True Lies, Shaleslip Manor, Book 2. Written by Emmaline Hoffmeister. Dedication. No one deserves happiness more than you. Chapter 1.
Gregory, must your foxhounds come to breakfast with us again?
Marjorie Royse said when 4 balls of endless vitality bounded between her and her husband and nearly tripped her. The pack of hounds ran to the end of the corridor, made a tight turn, and raced back to their beloved master at top speed.
If I am to bag a fox before Robert, I must have the fastest and best trained hounds.
Gregory Royse explained to his bride of nearly 5 months.
They need to be comfortable with me and ready to follow my every command. Consistency is key, my dear.
Can you command them to stop getting underfoot?
Marjorie said with a tinge of exasperation as one hound stopped right in front of her. She narrowly missed stepping on its paw.
Will Robert bring his own hounds? I am not sure I can manage 8 dogs in the house at once.
No, Robert does not like to travel with his hounds. He will borrow mine.
Oh, I see. So 2 of these are for Robert's use and 2 for you.
No, we will have 15 hounds at least on the hunt. These 4 are the best of the best, my alpha hounds. They will lead the pack, and the others will follow.
I do not care if they are your best hunters or not. I dislike them in the house, especially the breakfast room.
Marjorie.
Gregory paused, his mouth twitching.
My hounds must spend time with me. You know, a fox hunt is a game of hide and seek for adults, but with the grandest prize of all.
What might that be?
Marjorie was fairly certain he was fighting a smile. She would take a moment to indulge this playful side of him, which she was just getting to know, and then she would return to the dog situation.
Why? The right to crow champion over the other riders, of course. I always best Robert, and I am not about to let him bag the first fox because I was lax with the training of my foxhounds. Until you ride out on your first fox hunt, I do not expect you to understand, so please do not criticize my methods.
Me, on a fox hunt? Surely not.
She laughed. Gregory thought her laughter sounded like wind chimes blowing in the Derbyshire breeze.
It is entirely proper for women to take part in the hunt. My aunt Lady Edale hosts a hunt every September right after the close of the London season.
You forget, sir, that I am only a tolerable rider. My father's horses are so docile that unfortunately my horsemanship skills had no opportunity to improve before our marriage. I am sure it would be better for me to stay home and await your return. Besides, if every lady attended the hunt, who would you tell your stories to?
Are you teasing me?
The smile threatening to appear earlier now overspread his features.
Teasing you? Why, I never— Oh!
Marjorie cried out as Gregory's foxhounds tripped her again. Gregory reached out and caught her just in time to prevent a fall.
This is what I am talking about. Your dogs have no respect for anyone.
Here. I think it is safer this way.
Gregory said, sweeping a perturbed Marjorie into his arms and carrying her to the breakfast room with the 4 hounds gambolling at his feet. Marjorie's concern melted away as a giggle welled up and erupted into full laughter at her husband's silly antics.
Gregory, dear, set me down. What will the servants say?
Who cares?
Gregory tightened his grip on Marjorie as she tried unsuccessfully to force him to set her on solid ground. He would not relent, and it forced Marjorie to be carried the rest of the way by her husband.
Gregory, is not it very late to be having a fox hunt? Why, when I grew up at Elmgrove, there was never a fox hunt later than March.
Quite so, my dear. But the early, overly harsh winter and unsettled spring reduced the hunts last season, and the county is experiencing a high number of losses amongst our herds. Therefore, many estates in Derbyshire are hosting late-season fox hunts to mitigate the problem.
Oh dear, have we lost many animals?
We did. The fox did not kill the sheep themselves, but their attack forced us to put them down because of the physical damage caused. 4 lambs had their hind legs gnawed, and 8 ewes suffered damage to their eyes, ears, tongues, udders, and teats as they fought to save their young.
Oh, Gregory, that is terrible and so sad to hear. Do we now have motherless lambs?
Marjorie truly looked stricken from the loss.
We do. Young Charlie, who is still recovering from his wounds and must remain on light duty for quite some time, has volunteered to help watch them when he is not needed in the stables. Presently, we are forcing other ewes to milk them while restrained so they accept them. It is not the best of situations. Mr. Cooper is reaching out to all neighbouring estates to inquire about any lost lambs and to explore the possibility of purchasing ewes or orphaning our lambs.
Gregory, why did you not tell me about the attacks?
Gregory bounced Marjorie in his arms, tightening his grip before he descended the stairs with her.
Because I knew it would make you sad, and all I ever want to see is your smiling face.
Gregory tried to be light-hearted, but Marjorie could tell he was not telling the whole truth. She narrowed her eyes and tilted her head questioningly.
How can you know me so well already?
He did not expect a reply, and after a single deep breath explained,
The tenants and villagers become uneasy whenever something of this nature occurs. There is a bit of an unspoken rule that we do not discuss it openly and never in front of ladies.
Marjorie understood and tried to comfort him by snuggling tighter into his arms and offering him a quick kiss on his cheek.
You are a wonderful man, Gregory Royse.
Marjorie felt him slightly shudder, and his voice became quiet as he admitted,
It is entirely my fault. I take all the blame. We are updating the irrigation system in the northern fields, so I had the flocks moved to different fields. I had not known of the fox problem when I put them in the west pastures. I should have been thinking, but I was not. Brush surrounds that pasture. It conceals and creates a perfect hiding place for the wild beasts. The herd is now in the east pastures, nearer the manor, and I have increased the shepherds and livestock guardian dogs.
If this be the case, I hope you not only bag a fox before Robert, but I hope you are the first to bag 10.
As you wish, dearest.
Once they settled at the breakfast table and the hounds were given bones to gnaw on, Mr. Jones entered with a silver tray bearing the Morning Post and handed it to Mrs. Royse.
I see we received a letter from Gemma. I hope she made it to London all right.
Another letter for you and nothing for me. I think my sister entirely forgot about me the day we married.
Do not take offence,
Marjorie said as she opened the letter. Once she broke the seal, she opened the pages and held them out a little in front of her with one hand while patting the top of Gregory's hand with the other.
Are you condescending me?
He questioned, the teasing in his voice obvious to Marjorie.
Of course not, my dear. I think a better word would be patronising.
Gregory's laughter barreled from deep in his throat and then romped around the room, inducing his foxhounds to abandon their bones and do the same until they eventually landed at their master's feet, relentlessly barking. Gregory wiped laughing tears from the corner of his eyes with his napkin before they could escape and finally addressed his wife with a semblance of composure.
I am not offended. I could not be happier. Long has Gemma wanted a confidant besides her companion, and I am glad she has you.
Gregory glanced at his wife's letter, trying to make out what Gemma wrote. He had yet to admit, even to himself, that he missed receiving letters from his sister.
Yes, I can see just how glad you are,
Marjorie said, tilting the letter and hiding it from his prying eyes.
Gemma writes she arrived safely, which was especially appreciated after the turmoil of her journey here a fortnight ago.
They looked at one another and frowned as they remembered the fear, dread and apprehension surrounding her arrival and the necessity of her returning to London as quickly as another music master could be employed.
She had her first lesson with her new music master on Tuesday. She claims he is even better than the first and thinks her former master's decision to stay in Italy was a blessing in disguise. She thanks you for finding her another one so quickly. To help further her music studies, Mrs. Miller is taking her to several parlour performances the music master recommended would benefit her.
Marjorie paused to take a sip of her tea.
I am not sure that is such a good idea.
Gregory interjected. Marjorie narrowed her eyes over the top of her teacup, knowing full well what her husband would say when she asked,
"Whatever do you mean?
She is not yet out.
And why should a parlour performance matter?"
As you are well aware,
Gregory huffed.
they are a society event.
"Hardly.
Marjorie blandly intoned as she set her teacup down.
I would describe them as a preparation for a society event, a mere social event at best. It is a perfect environment to take a young lady preparing for her grand entrance into society. Come, Gregory, she must have an opportunity to practice."
Gregory did not agree, per se, but he could also not dispute her logic, so he avoided further conversation on the topic and asked,
How is Gemma? Does she seem well?
"I think so.
Marjorie said as she continued reading the letter.
She says here that the staff had a small memorial for Johnny. It appears as if one maid may have had a tender for him. She was so upset Mrs. Jameson had to give her a day off to recover."
Does she say who it was?
Gregory asked.
"No, she does not."
Marjorie set the finished letter aside and picked up her silverware.
"Oh, I almost forgot to tell you,"
she said, excitement playing across her face in stark contrast to the sadness that had been rolling around the room as memories of recent events tiptoed in before they could chase them out again.
"It is the happiest of news."
I could use some happy news right now. What is it?
Gregory laid down his fork and gave Marjorie his full attention.
"This morning I received a message from the midwife. She thinks the Baxter's babe will be born soon. Can you believe it? The first child to be born on the estate since we married. I sent Louise over as soon as I received the message. She will do everything possible to lessen Mrs. Baxter's burden while we await the babe's arrival."
Indeed, this is wonderful news. I know how eager you are about the child.
Visiting Mrs. Baxter and expecting her happiness has come so naturally to me. I cannot wait for the day when we may expect the arrival of our own child.
I am sure the day will come soon enough. Until then, let us enjoy the quiet and solitude. For once we have children, the halls of Shaleslip Manor will ring with laughter and frivolity, and we will never again have a moment's peace and quiet.
I confess I am eager for that day. I think a house full of little Gregorys would suit me.
I think I would prefer a house full of little Marjories, all with the same chestnut curls as their mama.
Gregory caressed Marjorie's cheek with his thumb.
Yes, I think a half-dozen daughters, just like their mother, would be splendid.
Do not forget, you must provide dowries for those daughters and find them all honourable husbands. I promise you, sons are much easier.
I had not thought of that,
Gregory said, his eyes clouding as thoughts of fortune-hunting rakes preying upon his future daughters flooded his mind. Marjorie suppressed a smile at her husband's distress and turned her attention to her food. When he, at last, seemed a little recovered, she said,
"I thought Robert was to arrive this morning in time for breakfast. Do you think all is well?"
Gregory glanced at the clock on the sideboard before saying,
You are right. He is running a little later than usual. His valet arrived with his luggage on time, so he cannot be too far behind. I am sure he will be here shortly. Mr. Belfast prepared kidney beans enough for an army. They are Robert's favourite, and he would not miss them for the world.
Chapter 2. Colonel Robert Booth cursed his mount for throwing him and bolting, forcing him to face a 10-mile walk over a rocky, sloping landscape to his cousin's estate. Trouble, his wily horse, was probably halfway to Edale Hall by now. The savage animal could barely be called a horse, was hardly worth the effort of keeping, and twice as bad as his name. Perhaps he should turn around and head home after him, for he was slightly closer to his own ancestral home than he was to his cousin's. No, his cousin was expecting him, and so to Shaleslip Manor he would go. Curse the ruddy beast and his harebrained notions of riding him on the fox hunt. He had thought Trouble's speed and efficiency, when put up against other animals, would offer him an edge over Volo, his cousin's prized hunter. Trouble, although deranged, was determined to run himself to death in order to win. If Robert was to bag a fox before Gregory, he would need an ambitious horse. He turned off the deserted country road into a wooded area. Robert's alternative route was not a shortcut in terms of distance, but the road on the other side of the wood saw a great deal more traffic, and his chances of getting a ride to Shalebury would be far better. Wild honeysuckle perfumed the air, a scent Robert always associated with his cousin's ancestral home in Derbyshire. It evoked childhood memories of running through the fields with Gregory, battling unseen enemies with little wooden swords and daggers. Robert fingered the small scar above his left eyebrow and allowed a conspiratorial smile to sneak across his face as a fond memory surfaced. It had been a hot July Sunday, and the last thing two young boys had wanted to do was sit still in Shaleslip Chapel, listening to boring old stories from a parson whose voice held no power. For the most part, he and Gregory had been poking each other in the ribs and secretly hiding rolled-up leaves in the lady's bonnet who sat in front of them. They were so bored it was difficult not to get in trouble with their intensely irritated and frustrated mothers. Though his voice was weak, and it was a miracle the boys were alert enough to hear his tale, he caught their attention with a story of a small boy named David, who killed a giant with nothing more than a slingshot and a rock. Robert remembered the moment Gregory had comprehended the story and poked him in the cheek, forcing his head towards the parson and his arm bumping the lady whose hat they had been redecorating. She turned her head and scowled at them with such a look that they should have died on the spot. Lady Susanna Edale's attention was directed to them at the same time, revealing their recent bonnet trimming endeavors, which horrified her and left her wide-eyed. She grabbed her son, Robert's, ear and forcefully pushed him back into his seat, sternly commanding him to
sit,
with a harsh whisper between clenched teeth. Lady Edale had been happy when the boys had sat back in their seats and were quiet for a full 10 minutes. Heaven help her. They even kept their heads bowed. They had never been so good or quiet for so long. Robert's mother looked over the boys' heads towards Lady Anne Royse, and the two women shrugged their shoulders at each other, knowing there was no controlling the cousins when they were together. Despite their governess's likely declaration of their inadequacy to memorize anything after hearing it only once, both boys successfully committed the parson's story to memory. The seed was sown, and Robert and Gregory were desperate to go outside and test the parson's theory. To the youngsters, the church services seemed endless, and the moment the congregation said Amen after the prayer, Gregory and Robert bolted from their seats and raced down the aisle and out the double doors before a single other person had left their pews. Not one person, parent or otherwise, dared follow their hasty exit, and had the boys slowed their pace, but a little, they would have heard all the ladies laughing at their childish antics. Soon the two had fashioned makeshift slingshots from scraps of saddle leather ransacked from the stables and gathered a modest pile of small crumbling shale stones that had slipped from the base of Mam Tor. It was time.
You have to be Goliath,
Robert had insisted to Gregory.
because you are taller than me.
That's not fair. They are my rocks.
Gregory countered.
How so? We both gathered them.
They are my stones, because they are on my land.
It is not your land. It is your father's land, and I am positive he would say they are my rocks too.
Hardly.
Gregory intoned, defeated. Then he had another genius idea that quickly perked him up.
Rock, paper, scissors for it.
You cheated!
Robert shouted as Gregory's fisted rock hand smashed down on Robert's scissored fingers. Gregory leaped for joy, exclaiming,
I'm David! You will die as Goliath!
The rest was history. An intense rock fight had ensued that had predictably ended in blood and the small scar above Robert's left eye. Robert reached to the ground, picked up a crumbled piece of shale, and threw it. He exactly struck the knot on the tree he had been aiming for. A glint of pleasure played in his eye. If they reenacted their David and Goliath battle today, Gregory would be the one sporting the scar. He shook off the memory with a slight chuckle and continued towards his cousin's home. For today, it was indeed his cousin's home, his cousin's rocks, and his cousin's land. Heaven help him! How he missed his favourite uncle who had, in his humble opinion, departed mortality at far too young an age 3 years ago. He was not yet 50. The mid-April day was warm, too warm, after the unusually cold winter they had just suffered through. Robert considered the ridiculousness of it, considering that yesterday had been so cold. Why hadn't he remarked to the stable hand how frigid it was, and how he hoped tomorrow, which was in all actuality now today, was a margin warmer? The weather needed to make up its mind. It was as fickle as a first-season debutante. Some people, especially those who lived most of the year here in the northern counties, might even consider it hot, especially for this time of year, but only if they had never visited the continent and felt real heat. Robert had been there more times than he ever wished to, and he could only consider today moderately warm at best. Robert walked on, covering a full mile before he felt the first blisters forming. His years in the military had toughened him for long marches, but riding boots were ill-suited for traversing woodlands and shale slopes on foot. He wished for his gun when a woodcock raced across his path to hide in a protective bramble patch. The animal reminded him of his purpose in coming to Shaleslip, a fox hunt. A true gentleman's sport, fox hunting, and no two hunts were ever the same. Early March fox hunts were Robert's favourite. Nothing made him feel more alive than galloping through the awakening countryside, leaping hedges and ditches, chasing after the hounds, bagging the catch, and seeing the signs of spring everywhere. Robert stepped out of the woodland onto the southern road and set for himself a steady military pace that would get him to his cousins in good time. He had occasionally been called upon to walk 50 miles over rough terrain while carrying his supplies. 10 miles should be as nothing to him. He whistled a merry military jig as he walked, his feet keeping pace with his tune. 2 miles into his walk, Robert heard a carriage coming up the road behind him. When he turned around, he saw a conveyance pulled by 4 handsome thoroughbreds. He stepped to the side of the road and waved his arms to get the coachman's attention.
Good day, sir.
Robert said as the conveyance stopped beside him.
Would you mind giving me a ride to the next village?
Good day yourself.
The coachman replied with a little trepidation as he cast a wary eye over Robert.
Mr.
Colonel Robert Booth. My horse threw me on the other side of the wood. I would be much obliged if you would convey me to Shalebury if it is not too far out of your way.
Booth, you say? Your father is the Earl of Edale?
Yes. Do you know him?
I know of him.
What is the delay?
A man with a thick Portuguese accent called from inside the carriage.
Get along, Mr. Tate.
Yes, get along.
Seconded another man. His French accent was less pronounced than the Portuguese fellow's, but unmistakable nonetheless.
Begging your pardon, my lord, but the good colonel here is stranded. Can we give him a ride?
I do not think it is a good idea to give rides to strange men,
said the Portuguese gentleman as he put his head out the window and looked down his long nose at Robert. A pretty face, haloed by golden ringlets, peeked out from behind the gentleman just as Robert was about to respond. His breath caught in his throat when he saw her. It had been over 4 years since he last laid eyes on Lady Opale de Dampierre as he left her home and boarded the London-bound boat in Aberdeen. She was an angel with porcelain skin and cherry-red lips. Robert held her gaze, lost in memory for a moment, before he tipped his hat and her blue eyes widened in recognition.
Colonel Booth,
She gasped.
You know this man?
The Portuguese gentleman asked.
yes.
Opal said with a slight tremble in her voice.
Give him a ride, please.
The Frenchman who had spoken earlier now strained to turn around in his seat and see the good colonel.
Yes, yes, give the man a ride. It is good to see you again, Colonel Booth. Climb up top with Mr. Tate, if you will. We are rather crowded inside as it is.
Thank you, Lord Hugo.
Robert replied with a bow. No sooner had he climbed into the driver's box than the coachman snapped the reins to get the team moving again. Robert's rump hit the seat with almost enough force to topple him backwards. He righted himself and got settled, shooting a reproachful glare at Mr. Tate.
I hope you will be comfortable riding here on the box with me, sir,
The man said in a friendly tone, oblivious to Robert's brief difficulty.
You would not want to be inside on a day like today. It is far too hot. When we get moving a little faster, we shall have a nice breeze up here while they stifle in there.
He was right. Sitting atop the carriage was cooler, with the wind blowing across his sweaty face, though Robert felt no relief. The sight of Lady Opale was enough to set his heart racing and increase his temperature at least 10 degrees. Was she as bothered by the sight of him as he was of her? He shifted uncomfortably on the seat and examined the sky. The sun was directly overhead. He should have been at Shaleslip hours ago. Scanning the horizon, he wondered where his horse had got to and wished he had him now so he could ride off and disappear forever. 30 minutes later, he knew he was nearing his cousin's property. He was dying to be off the carriage. He had traversed most of the distance in silence, nothing but his thoughts torturing him with every sound he heard emitted from the carriage. In the distance, he could see 2 of Shaleslip Manor's chimneys. The estate was at least a mile away, but he dared not ask to be taken there. After a quick calculation, he concluded it would take longer to walk to the house from there versus riding the rest of the distance to Shalebury and then hiring a horse to bring him the distance back to Shaleslip Manor. He tried to convince himself that he only remained on the carriage because of his pinching boots and blistered feet, but he could not fool himself. He knew the real reason he was remaining, and it had everything in the world to do with the woman who had captured his heart 4 years ago. He had thought he would never see her again. He almost wished it. Now that he had seen her, however, he had to speak to her just one more time. So preoccupied was he with his inner struggle, Robert did not at first notice the 3 men on horses with pistols drawn, rushing out of the heavy brush and weeds. They took hold of the reins, pulling the horses to a stop.
Everybody out of the coach, now.
Mr. Tate leaned close to Robert and said,
Do not try anything foolish.
I have no intention of trying anything at all.
Robert answered, holding his hands up as a second man waved a pistol at him.
Throw down your weapon.
The leader of the highwaymen said, waving his pistol at Robert's sidearm. Slowly, Robert lowered one hand to his pistol and withdrew it from his holster. He threw it to the ground, where it landed in the weeds with a thud, a small cloud of dust wafting up and then settling.
Come on. I said get out of the carriage. All of you.
The carriage door opened, and a tall, elegant man stepped down. He took a moment to straighten his waistcoat and jacket as he assessed the highwaymen with disapproving eyes before handing down Lady Opale and her father, Prince du Saint-Gérard de Dampierre, Marquis of Hugo. Robert and Mr. Tate descended from the driver's seat and stood next to the carriage with the occupants, while a scrawny footman, whom Robert had not even noticed before, scrambled down from his perch by the luggage. Robert cast a glance at Lady Opal, who was watching him with undisguised interest. He could still feel her gaze on him when he looked away.
What is the meaning of this? Who are these men?
Lord Hugo demanded of the driver.
Calm yourself, my lord. If we do as they say, they will take what they want and leave us alone.
This is outrageous. Tate, I demand you do something.
Do you not see those weapons pointed at us, my lord?
Mr. Tate pulled his pistol from his holster and threw it on the ground to join Robert's. The third highwayman unstrapped the luggage from the back of the carriage and tossed the largest trunk to the ground. Taking up a large rock, the second man broke off the lock and rummaged through the contents. When gowns, petticoats and stockings were thrown on the ground, it was evident that the trunk belonged to Lady Opal. Lord Hugo stepped forward with an indignant cry.
Do not be foolish.
The Portuguese gentleman said as he took hold of Lord Hugo's arm and held him back.
They are taking Opal's dowry. We will be left penniless, destitute.
Better penniless than dead,
answered the Portuguese gentleman.
Father, do not be rash. Dom André is right,
Lady Opal said, taking hold of her father's other arm. The highwayman hoisted a small, heavy chest out of Opal's trunk and handed it up to his leader, who then turned his horse and galloped away. Lord Hugo pulled his arm from his daughter's grip and pushed the Portuguese gentleman away as he rushed to the pistols lying in the weeds. He picked up the coachman's weapon, which was closest, and took aim as he shouted,
"Stop, thief!"
The two remaining highwaymen leapt onto their horses and raced after their leader. Lord Hugo fired after them, but his hand shook so badly that the shot went wide. The recoil threw Lord Hugo off balance, and he stumbled backwards. His heel caught in a rut, and he fell, hitting his head on a rock. Robert leapt into action. He went to Lord Hugo and knelt to inspect the wound. When he pulled his hand from the back of Lord Hugo's head, it was covered with blood, and he heard a slight cry escape Lady Opal.
It is bad. We had better take him to my cousin's estate.
Where is this place you speak of?
The Portuguese gentleman inquired with a cautious mien.
Do you see the chimneys over there?
Robert pointed to the two chimneys still visible across the wild countryside.
Yes, I see them.
That is Shaleslip Manor. It is closer than the nearest village. My cousin, Mr. Royse, will take you in and send a man into the village for the physician.
Very well. Let's get him in the carriage and go to your cousin's estate.
The Portuguese gentleman helped Robert get Lord Hugo back into the carriage, while the agitated footman quickly gathered Opal's scattered belongings and haphazardly threw them in her trunk. As soon as the unconscious Lord Hugo was as comfortably situated as possible and Opal's trunk secured, Robert climbed up with the coachman and directed him to Shaleslip Manor.
Give them their heads and let them run. We are almost there.
Robert shouted over the clatter of the carriage wheels as they turned onto the well-maintained drive leading to Shaleslip Manor. Mr. Tate obeyed, and soon they pulled the carriage to a stop in front of the manor house. Robert shouted for help and the doors opened, revealing Mr. Jones, Shaleslip's butler.
Jones, get my cousin immediately. Highwaymen on the southern road attacked us. This man hit his head and needs medical attention.
Chapter 3. Since his arrival, Dr. Davies had been shut up in Lord Hugo's room while the Royses attempted to calm their guests in the sitting room. Lady Opale de Dampierre had cried for the first hour after their arrival. Nothing anyone said had stemmed her near hysteria and the flow of her tears, but they were beginning to dry on their own, and she was much more rational when the doctor finished with her father and came to report on his condition.
Doctor, is he...
Opal's pretty face revealed her distress as she constantly fiddled with her gown or wrung her lace handkerchief.
Fortunately, appearances were deceiving. Your father is not as badly hurt as we first thought,
Dr. Davies said.
Praise the Lord!
Opal exclaimed, her hand going to her heart.
That is wonderful news.
The Portuguese gentleman, who had introduced himself as Dom André de Costa, Grand Duke of Pombal, ceased his restless pacing in front of the windows.
See, all will be well,
Marjorie said, patting Opal's hand.
Dr. Davies is the best physician. I never doubted he would work his miracles on your father.
You are kind, Mrs. Royse, but I cannot accept the whole of the credit. Much of it lies with your cousin's quick thinking.
Dr. Davies turned his attention to Robert, who sat across from Marjorie and Opal.
Colonel Booth, it was a wise decision to bring him here rather than attempt the longer ride into Shalebury. He may not have fared as well as he has if they had jostled him in that carriage much further.
Has he regained consciousness?
Robert asked.
Oh yes, he certainly has. He awoke and had such a fierce and boisterous reaction. I had to give him a powder to keep him quiet. A maid is watching over him now.
Opal gave him a weak smile, relieved to learn her father was doing so well.
Lady Opal, your father certainly has spirit. He is just aching to take up the chase after those highwaymen. When I told him that was impossible, he demanded his coachman be called and set the man after them. He wants to bring back some sort of chest. I told him he was caper-witted for even thinking such a thing. As I understand it, it will be 3 against 1. The man could be killed.
Opal shook her head, her distress clear.
You do not understand, sir. In the chest is my dowry. Dom André, why did you not go after those highwaymen yourself? You know what the loss of my dowry means.
But my dearest one, I could not leave you while your father's life was in danger. Now that he is safe, I will go after them.
Senor de Costa, that is unnecessary,
Gregory said.
My men are already searching the countryside for the highwaymen. I am sure they will catch them soon. In the meantime,
Dr. Davies interjected.
Lord Hugo must remain quiet and in bed for at least 3 or 4 days. I will look in on him tomorrow.
I cannot thank you enough, sir,
Opal said.
Not at all. You may send for me if I am needed again. We will. Colonel Booth will see you out,
Gregory said.
Stay where you are, Colonel. I know my way.
Excuse me, I must go to my father. Will you show me to his room?
Opal implored of Marjorie.
With the powder Dr. Davies gave him, he will sleep for a few hours at least. It would be better not to disturb him. When he wakes, the maid will send for us. Shall I call for refreshments in the meantime? You must be famished after your journey,
Marjorie said.
I cannot eat right now. I am far too agitated. Heaven forbid my stomach flutters, and I feel quite nauseous.
How about some tea? Would that help calm your nerves?
Yes, perhaps. Thank you, Mrs. Royse. I am most grateful for your hospitality,
Opal said, accepting the proffered cup of tea from Marjorie.
Our home is open to you for as long as you need. I shall be glad to further our acquaintance and only regret the shocking nature of the circumstances that brought us together. I hope you will feel comfortable here while your father recovers.
We are very much in your debt.
Think nothing of it,
Marjorie said as she returned to the tea cart to serve the others. Opal sipped her tea and then placed it back on the saucer. She looked at Senor de Costa and asked,
Dom André, what will happen if my dowry is not recovered?
When Gregory saw the pensive Dom was not inclined to answer, he gave Opal a reassuring smile.
Do not be uneasy. I am certain we will recover it. And if it is not, you may take solace in your continued good health and your father's imminent recovery.
Indeed, he was surprised the young woman could be so concerned for her dowry when so much more was at stake.
You do not seem to understand, Mr. Royse,
Senor de Costa said.
You see, the dowry is worth £100,000.
Oh.
Gregory looked at Robert, who confirmed the veracity of Dom André's claim with a curt nod.
Did you not consider the risk of carrying such a fortune without armed escorts?
I considered it, of course, but after the steps we took, I did not think it was necessary. Lord Hugo did not like to part from the jewels, and long sea voyages make him ill, so we thought to travel by land to a more southern port for his comfort. Before we left Aberdeen, I sent my valet to Portugal via the sea with 2 hired guards and a strong box. I have the only key to the box, and none of my men know it is a decoy. It is for these reasons I am touring England in Lord Hugo's humble equipage, with only a driver and single footman.
Our wedding is to take place in a few weeks' time at my home in Coiras. We must recover the dowry so that everyone can witness it. It is a tradition. If the dowry is not recovered or replaced, my family's custom will prevent me from marrying my lovely Opal.
Opal dabbed at her teary eyes with her handkerchief and prayed fervently for a positive outcome.
Just loving Lady Opal is not enough,
Robert asked. He turned towards the woman who had broken his heart 4 years ago. She was even more beautiful than he remembered and clearly troubled by the conversation. She studied her hands, refusing to look at any of them, especially him.
Robert!
Gregory gave his cousin a withering look of warning. He was treading on dangerous ground.
I am descended from the house of Braganza, reigning house of the Kingdom of Portugal and the Algarves. My Opal's father is Noblesse d'Extraction, a Prince du Sang, descended from Louis XV of the house of the Hugo. Love does not matter in unions such as ours.
Senor de Costa intoned coldly.
Oh, I see. So you do not love her,
Robert said, continuing to study Opal, who appeared even more distressed than before by the proclamations of her betrothed.
Robert!
Gregory scolded a second time.
I did not say that, Colonel Booth.
Senor de Costa huffed. He stood straight and tossed his head to flick his dark hair out of his eyes. Opal leapt to her feet and rushed to her intended. She put her hand on his forearm and pleaded,
Please, Dom Andre, must we drag such intimate matters into the open? It does not matter what Colonel Booth says. We alone can know our hearts.
She gave a wounded glance over her shoulder, silently begging Robert to hold his tongue.
Lady Opal is absolutely correct. Robert, this is none of our concern.
Gregory said, trying to rescue their party from this most uncomfortable conversation. His expression implored his wife to assist him.
Lady Opal, perhaps you would like to rest. We have already delivered your trunk to your room upstairs next to your father's. I can take you there now if you like.
Marjorie said, every bit as anxious as her husband to relieve the tension building between Robert and Senor de Costa.
Yes, I would like that. I am exhausted.
Opal admitted.
Rest well, my dear.
Senor de Costa said, bowing to his lady. Gregory and Robert silently followed suit. Robert's eyes never left Opal as she followed Marjorie out of the room. He inspected her elegant figure and enjoyed the sway of her gown as she walked. She was as graceful as ever, only now her curves were more pronounced in her fully developed womanly figure. She was mesmerizing.
Senor de Costa, shall I call for the housekeeper to show you to your rooms?
Gregory asked.
Thank you, but I am not tired. If you do not mind, I would like to use this time to explore your estate. May I borrow a horse?
Of course. I have business to attend to, but I am sure Colonel Booth would happily give you a tour as soon as you are ready. He knows the grounds as well as anyone. Or if you would prefer, I can escort you myself when my business is discharged.
Either is to my satisfaction.
I will go with him,
Robert said.
It will give me a chance to speak to Charlie. I need to send someone to Edale Hall to inquire if Trouble made his way home or not.
I see your horse is still living up to his name. You should return the beast to your father and accept one of my horses instead. I have just the mare for you.
Perhaps I will. First, let me discover where he is, and then I will decide.
Lady Opal's room was neat, comfortable, and perfectly suited to a lady in her position, with its elegant furnishings and soft cream and gold decor. Marjorie helped her guest settle and left her to rest, taking a moment to check on Lord Hugo in the next room. The maid looked up when the door opened. Scurrying to her feet, she curtsied to Marjorie and answered her inquiries. Lord Hugo was still sleeping, but she promised to send word when he awoke. Now that she settled the de Dampierre, Marjorie returned downstairs to see to Senor de Costa. The Dom was an enigma to her. She had witnessed his care of Lady Opale when they first arrived, but as the hours passed, his reserve had increased until he had seemed entirely devoid of feeling when he explained the importance of the dowry. As a woman who came to her marriage with a moderate dowry by town standards, but small compared to the dowry a man of her husband's fortune could have expected, Marjorie was now prone to romantic fancies. It saddened her to imagine two lovers would be kept apart because of circumstances outside of their control. She had seen how Senor de Costa cared for Lady Opale and how the lady had become so distressed by Robert's insinuations. This was no mere union of noble houses. If Marjorie was any judge, the couple was in love. Deep and ardent love was hard to find and worthy of being saved. It did not matter how their betrothal had come about. They had found happiness and love, even in an arranged marriage.
Gregory,
Marjorie said when she entered his study and found him bent over his desk inspecting some documents. His dogs looked up from where they lay below the window, gnawing on the bones Mr. Belfast had saved for them. Marjorie stepped over them to stand by Gregory, placing her hand gently below the nape of his neck. He looked up and smiled at his beautiful wife. Setting his documents aside, he took her other hand.
What is it, my love?
Lady Opale is resting comfortably in her room. Where is Senor de Costa? His room is ready as well.
He wished to tour the grounds. Robert is riding out with him.
Do you think that is wise? I suspect Robert was deliberately trying to rile Senor de Costa earlier. I hope he does not upset our guest.
Senor de Costa can hold his own. I am more concerned about his fiancé. You say she is resting now?
Marjorie nodded.
Good.
Marjorie leaned against Gregory's desk.
Thank you for marrying me with a relatively small dowry. I know your family had greater expectations for your wife. I will forever be grateful you challenged them and thwarted their plans. I am positive I would never be satisfied with anyone but you. I love you, Gregory Royse.
And I love you, my loveliest Marjorie.
Gregory leaned back in his chair and tugged on Marjorie's hand until she settled on his lap. She loved being near him, with his arms wrapped around her, holding her tight against him. Her breath caught in her throat when he kissed her cheek and nuzzled her neck. She surrendered to every sensation he was causing within her, turning her head and meeting his lips with her own. Their few short months of marriage had surpassed even her most romantic fancies. Their love had been a mere bud the day they married, and now it was opening into full bloom. Marjorie could not wait to see the mature flower it would one day be. Chapter 4. Robert sent a messenger to Edale Hall to check on his horse and assure his parents he was not laying in a ditch injured. He further instructed him to leave the ruddy beast there if trouble was indeed in residence. Upon brief reflection, he had decided to take Gregory up on his offer of the new mare. He sought out Senor de Costa in the stables once his errand was discharged, and found him deep in conversation with Charlie, the young groom.
Ah, Colonel Booth, I am ready,
the Dom said when he caught sight of Robert.
Young Charlie has been telling me of the latest innovations being employed in Shaleslip's irrigation systems.
Charlie, how do you know of the improvements?
Robert inquired of the lad with his arms still wrapped in a sling.
I's in charge of making sure the surviving lambs is fed.
Charlie beamed at Robert as if his statement made perfect sense.
I am in charge of making sure the surviving lambs are fed.
Robert emphasized the words he corrected for the lad.
Thank you, sir. I am trying my hardest, and I am glad you help me whenever you visit. I want to better my life.
Robert tousled Charlie's hair and clarified.
So explain to me how feeding lambs makes you an expert on Mr. Royce's new irrigation systems.
Good, Colonel. I am only temporarily feeding the lambs, which is a lesser duty. I have been promoted to head groom for Volo.
Charlie's face veritably glowed with pride. Senor da Costa watched with slight curiosity and a lot of irritation that they were not already on their way. Robert waved his hand to speed him along.
I listen, sir, I listen. Mr. Royse told Mr. Cooper to tell Mr. Johnson to tell me I am responsible for the lambs. I was nearby all the men talking, and now I know why.
You eavesdropped?
No, sir, I was grooming Volo while they were talking loud nearby.
They were.
Thank you, sir.
Robert closely studied Charlie for a moment.
And you understood what they were saying?
Yes, sir. My uncle is a tenant.
Charlie stumbled over the word.
Tenant?
Robert helped.
Yes, tenant of Mr. Royce's, and I help when uncle has puddled water because of the mud rock. My auntie reads, and if I help my uncle, she teaches me. Mr. Cooper says book learning is necessary to better my position.
It is called standing water. Remember that, Charlie.
Yes, sir, I will.
Necessary.
Senor da Costa offered to Charlie, as it seemed the good colonel had not offered the boy the proper pronunciation of the word he struggled with. Colonel Booth and Charlie looked at Dom André in shock. Robert was so engaged in the conversation with Charlie that he almost entirely forgot his purpose in the stables.
Very good. We will talk later about your other eavesdropping.
No eavesdropping, sir. Just keeping my ears open to learn. Mr. Cooper says to be better, I need to know lots of things.
That's right, Charlie. That's right. Senor da Costa, are you ready to go see these fancy irrigation updates?
I am Colonel Booth. I would very much like to see them. Lord Hugo's fear of ocean travel initially caused a delay. That annoyed me, however. I am now quite happy to see so many of your great English estates. I have learned of many improvements I can make to my land. I am hopeful to learn even more from Mr. Royce's advanced management techniques.
My cousin is one of the most attentive landowners in all of England. I am sure you will learn a lot. We had better be off if we are to have time to see everything.
Robert said as he accepted the horse's reins that had been saddled for him.
I am sure you have much to do, Colonel.
Senor da Costa said coolly.
It is unnecessary for you to waste your valuable time accompanying me. Charlie may escort me instead.
Charlie nodded with enthusiasm. They had restricted him to light duties while his arm healed from a recent injury, and the normally active young man was fit to expire from boredom.
If that is your wish, I confess I had not planned to spend my day touring the property.
It is. Young Charlie has proved his knowledge, and I am sure a boy of his caliber knows all the land's best advantages.
Senor da Costa said as he mounted the horse being held for him. Robert passed the reins of his horse to Charlie and watched him expertly mount with his one good arm.
You be careful out there, Charlie. You know Mr. and Mrs. Royce will have my head if you further hurt your arm.
I like Mrs. Royce.
Charlie stated matter-of-factly.
She visits me every day and checks on my arm.
He leaned towards Robert in a conspiratorial fashion and whispered,
She sneaks me an extra of Mr. Belfast's sweets when she comes.
Robert threw his head back in a hearty laugh and hit the rump of Charlie's horse, sending him and Senor da Costa out of the stables towards the north fields. The riders were out of sight before Robert turned back to the house. On his return, he thought back to the remarkable events that had thrown Opale into his path all those years ago. His regiment had captured a French spy crossing Belgium in the black of night. The spy had information regarding a British agent operating covertly in Brussels and had been on her way to relay it to an intermediary in Paris. The intermediary's identity was unknown, and Robert had been sent to Paris to determine whether the woman's husband was involved. When he arrived in Paris, he learned the husband had fled to Aberdeen, Scotland, some years before with his daughter and his fortune. He had followed the leads to Aberdeen, where, instead of the wealthy aristocrat he had expected to find, he found a genteel pauper with a beautiful 18-year-old daughter. According to local gossip, the displaced Marquis of Hugo had squandered his entire fortune, except for his daughter's dowry, searching for his errant wife, of whose profession he seemed entirely ignorant. Forced to seek employment, Lord Hugo and his daughter paid their bills by running a small milliner's shop. Lady Opale had a knack for trimming bonnets, and Lord Hugo was so charming it was said he could sell milk to a cow. Robert well remembered the exact moment he had first set eyes on Lady Opale de Dampierre. The second day after he arrived in Aberdeen, he had entered the milliner's shop with the sole purpose of observing Lord Hugo. As soon as he stepped through the door, however, his eyes had been drawn to the porcelain skin, golden hair, and piercing eyes of the Marquise's fair daughter. He hardly noticed the object of his investigation standing at the counter and chatting with customers. So distracted was he that he forgot his purpose for entering the shop until well after Lord Hugo had bamboozled him into purchasing bonnets for nearly every female relation he had. For 7 days, Robert had stayed in Aberdeen, watching and interacting with Lord Hugo and his daughter. When he left, he was convinced the two had no contact with the treacherous Marchioness de Dampierre. He had struck up a friendship with them both and felt genuine regard for them, though Lord Hugo had given him to know in no uncertain terms that the younger son of an earl was unworthy of his darling Opal. The evening before Robert left Aberdeen, they invited him to dine with them. After supper, he and Opal had spent hours in private conversation while her father snored in his chair by the fire. Twice, Robert had almost kissed her, but did not for fear of causing a scandal. Though their acquaintance had been short, he believed himself to be in love with her. He had asked for her permission to return and court her, but they both knew it could come to nothing. Lord Hugo had jealously guarded his daughter's substantial dowry for the sole purpose of securing her an advantageous marriage. He had already started negotiations with a noble Portuguese house. Opal had been touched by Robert's regard and confessed she liked him too, but she could not go against her father's wishes. Robert had left the de Dampierre residence shortly after her confession and had not seen or heard from her since. Seeing her now, the fiancé of a lesser royal and aristocrat, made his heart ache for her all over again. He knew Lady Opal would never be his, but she was his first adult love, the first woman he had ever considered giving his heart to. He needed to make sure she was happy. Señor de Costa seemed to be an emotionless man who only cared for Opal's dowry. Such a lady as she deserves better, Robert thought. She deserves a man who will appreciate her, all of her. When he entered Shaleslip Manor, Robert resolved to discover Señor de Costa's true feelings towards Opal. If he determined the Dom could not make her happy, he would whisk her away and do the job himself.
Robert, come here. I want to speak with you.
Gregory called from the library as Robert passed.
Must it be now, cousin? I intended to find Marjorie and see if Lady Opal is with her. I should like to renew our acquaintance.
Where is Señor de Costa? Did I not leave him in your care?
He preferred Charlie's company to mine, so I sent them off to tour the estate together. That's a sharp lad.
He certainly is. Mr. Cooper is overseeing his education. I don't want to talk about Charlie right now, though. I would have preferred you accompanied Señor de Costa yourself. The men I sent out in search of the highwaymen have not returned. If Señor de Costa should run afoul of them again, Charlie is in no condition to defend him. I do not want him coming to harm on my land.
Robert followed Gregory from the library to his study, the foxhounds going wild at his arrival. He knelt beside them and rubbed their ears as he said,
He insisted. What was I to do? Force the point.
Gregory frowned at him.
Have no fear. When Señor de Costa is done inspecting your fancy irrigation system, he will return. Until then, I intend to entertain Lady Opal in his absence.
Turning his head a little to the side, he mumbled,
The sot does not know the gem he has.
Gregory could not be sure he had heard Robert correctly, but in case he had, he said,
Robert, you will stay away from that woman. She is not to be dallied with.
You wound me, Gregory.
Robert said with mock seriousness as he grasped at his chest with a splayed hand. Seeing his cousin was unamused, he left off playing with the hounds and went to the sideboard to pour himself a drink. He suspected he would need to fortify himself for the coming lecture.
What makes you think I would dally with Lady Opal?
I know you, Robert. I know what you are capable of. Keep away from Lady Opal. Portuguese men are known for their mean tempers. I will not have you coming to blows with Senor da Costa while he is a guest in my house.
Now you have truly wounded me, cousin. Has it occurred to you that my intentions may be pure? That I may have been shot with Cupid's arrow the moment I saw Lady Opal? That I may have found my one true love?
I think it more likely you were shot with Cupid's arrow when you learned of her sizable dowry.
You know naught of what you speak, cousin.
I think I do. I am sure rogues like you have plagued her since before she debuted in society. Do not underestimate her or her father, and especially do not underestimate Senor da Costa. They are aristocrats. They know how to play the games of the beau monde, which you and I have little experience with and are no good at.
Good God, Gregory, have you always thought so ill of me?
Robert, I am not blind. I saw how you watched her in the sitting room while Dr. Davies attended to her father. I saw you baiting Senor da Costa by quizzing him about his feelings for his intended. I will not allow it. Not at Shaleslip, you stay away from her. Am I understood?
If you were any other man, I would call you out for slandering my good name. I have never ruined an innocent, and I never will.
Robert levelled his gaze at Gregory over his glass as he took a large swallow of brandy.
You may not have ruined their reputations, but you certainly encourage the ladies and give them false hopes.
Robert's voice was calm but icy as he said,
Name one woman to whom I made false promises and left broken-hearted.
Miss Janice Westerham.
Robert waved his hand in dismissal.
Pish-posh, she does not count. Name another.
She counts. Every woman counts, but if you insist, I will name another. Miss Philippa Longhurst.
She was just a child. She was broken-hearted over half the bachelors in London, though she did not mourn us for long. She is married now, you know.
Robert took another swallow of brandy, still watching his cousin.
I will not indulge you by continuing this charade. I could name 10 other women, including my own Marjorie, though she was too smart to be taken in by you. Admit it, you attempted to engage her affections. I think you enjoy making women fall in love with you.
I will admit to no such thing. Your wife and I merely enjoyed each other's company. I gave her to understand right away that she and I could be nothing more than friends.
Regardless, you will stay away from Lady Opal.
I will not. I have a prior acquaintance with Lady Opal and her father. Your 10-minute association does not give you the right to dictate how I interact with them.
Robert struggled with his wounded pride, but then he rose and straightened his riding coat.
I have no wish to discuss this further. Please excuse me.
Robert strode to the billiards room in anger, leaned over the table and hung his head. He thrummed his fingers on the polished wood and closed his eyes. His cousin Gregory had been his best friend since childhood, though he had felt in recent years that Gregory's friend from Oxford, Mr. Wallace, had usurped his place in Gregory's heart. Never had he felt it more strongly than now. Gregory knew him, knew his heart. He should know Robert would never intentionally hurt a woman or trifle with her affections. Sudden understanding dragged him from the depths of his melancholy thoughts. Robert shook his head. He knew what Gregory most likely was not even aware of himself. Robert straightened and readjusted his riding coat before striding back to the study.
You are jealous,
he accused his cousin as soon as he entered.
Jealous? Why should I be jealous of you?
Yes, why indeed? You, Gregory Royse, have it all. The estate, the fortune, and the woman best suited to you. You got her. I never had a chance, as you justly pointed out. Marjorie's heart was untouched by me, but then, when I first made her acquaintance, her heart was not touched by you either. Quite the opposite, in fact. Admit it, you are sore at me because there was a day when your wife liked me better than you.
You have taken leave of your senses.
Gregory scoffed, though Robert noticed his cousin would not look him in the eye.
God's teeth, Gregory, have you been sore at me for over half a year?
With a grim look, Gregory remained silent.
This is beneath you, cousin. Marjorie was never in love with me. It was you she always wanted, even when she did not know it. Now, can we be friends again? We mustn't let a rift grow between us. I would hate to miss out on your fox hunts and Mr. Belfast's kidney beans just because you are insecure in your wife's devotion.
Gregory bristled at Robert's jocular tone.
I am not insecure in my wife's devotion.
You could have fooled me,
Robert retorted with a wicked grin. Gregory glared at him for a moment longer, then sighed, leaning his elbows on the desk and putting his head in his hands, he admitted.
You are right. I was jealous, and before today, I never thought you were a rake. Seeing you cast the same charming smile on Lady Opal that you used to cast on Marjorie brought up emotions I thought I had buried long ago. I am sorry I accused you unfairly.
Apology accepted.
Robert smiled and held out his hand.
Shake hands with me, old boy. We are friends again.
Gregory smiled and shook his hand.
Of course we are.
Very good. I will leave you now and return to the billiards room until our guests come down for supper.
I may not know all the particulars of your prior association with the de Dampierre, but I do have eyes, and I saw how you looked at Lady Opal. I want you to be careful. She is an engaged woman, promised to a Portuguese royal no less.
Gregory said as Robert left the study. Robert turned around and gave Gregory an appraising look, which Gregory met without wavering.
I know what I am doing,
Robert said with a little less than his usual conviction. Chapter 5.
Please, Papa, you must eat.
Opal begged as she held a spoonful of broth near Lord Hugo's lips. Lord Hugo shook his head and kept his lips closed tight. The man was stubborn, refusing to do anything that was not his idea, and sipping broth in bed certainly was not his idea. He would much rather explore the grand house he was in with his pretty hostess. Though he had been unconscious when he arrived, and he had yet to see any part of the house beyond his room, he could tell it was immense. The sheer opulence of his room spoke of affluence. A light knock came upon the open door, and Mr. Royse poked his head inside the room.
Come in, Mr. Royse.
Lord Hugo said, waving his arm with as much exuberance as a man who had cracked his head on a rock could muster. His daughter took the opportunity of his distraction to pour the spoonful of broth into his mouth. He swallowed and glared at her as Mr. Royse came in and stood near Marjorie, who sat by the window and watched father and daughter with amusement.
Papa, how can you expect to heal if you will not eat? You must keep up your strength.
Actually, he is doing rather well for a man who suffered a head injury this morning,
Marjorie said.
Why should I not do well with such friends as you have turned out to be? I would be ungrateful to do otherwise,
said Lord Hugo.
A daughter is never satisfied. But Mrs. Royse is right, Papa.
Opal conceded as she set the tray aside.
Mr. Royse, have your men returned with news of my Opal's dowry?
Lord Hugo asked.
No, they have not. That is what I came to speak to you about.
Gregory replied.
If you will excuse me.
Marjorie said.
I will let you gentlemen talk. Lady Opal, would you like to accompany me to the music room?
Yes, I would like that. I will return soon, Papa. Send for me if you need me.
Opal kissed her father's forehead, adjusted his blankets, and then followed Marjorie out of the room.
You have a devoted daughter,
Gregory said when the door had closed behind the ladies.
Oh yes, she takes great care of me. I could not wish for a better one.
It is good to see you so much improved.
Thank you for bringing the doctor. It was fortune indeed that we happened upon Colonel Booth when we did. Your doctor told me I may have fared far worse if we had continued to the village.
Yes, my cousin has always been level-headed in times of crisis. This is the first chance we have had to talk. Do you mind if I sit?
Of course, come in and speak with me. I do not know how to thank you enough. I could have died, and then what would have happened to my sweet daughter?
You owe us nothing. I am glad we could be of service to you,
Gregory said as he made himself comfortable in a chair near the bed.
My Opal is lovely. She looks so much like her mother did in her youth. She has been gone many years now.
Lord Hugo explained.
I'm sorry to hear that.
My wife left us when Opal was but a child. She is dead now. It is just as well, for it would have killed her to see our reduced circumstances.
I see,
Gregory said, amazed and slightly discomfited by the man's willingness to confide in a stranger.
France was in such turmoil after the revolution. I lost everything except Opal's dowry. I was determined not to touch that, and I was equally determined that Opal should have a proper marriage to a man worthy of her, despite my poor choices. We are directly descended from French royalty, you know.
And Senor de Costa?
Gregory asked.
I understand his family is royalty as well.
Indeed, he is from the house of Braganza. He can provide for my daughter in a way I could not these past years. Fortunately, I kept her dowry safe.
Why is the dowry so important to a wealthy man like Senor de Costa?
Certainly, a great man such as yourself understands the importance of a dowry, Mr. Royse.
I understand the importance some people place on it, but I believe it is more important to judge a lady's worth by her individual talents. A lady who lacks wealth but possesses proper education can be just as worthy as a wealthy woman with a lax education, more worthy even.
I see, sir, that you are one of those men who puts aside the traditions of your forefathers and embraces the ridiculous nonsense of educating women and making them equal partners. To explain to you why Dom André places such importance on the dowry would be like describing colors to a blind man. How could I make you understand?
Lord Hugo laughed at his own wit, and Gregory attempted to follow suit, though he was not a man accustomed to laughing, and he felt slighted by Lord Hugo's benign condescension.
Our family customs are ingrained in us, handed down generation upon generation for centuries. The dowry is an important element in a marriage contract between families such as de Dampierre and de Costa. It is not something we can set aside, no matter how worthy the woman or how extensive her education.
Gregory was uncertain of how to respond, but Lord Hugo saved him the trouble, leaning back against his pillows with a weary sigh.
I have made you talk for too long. You should rest now,
Gregory said with real concern. He stood and took a step towards the door.
No, thank you. You are too kind. I am not tired. I only despair of retrieving my Opal's fortune. Without it, she will not have the life she deserves. Senor de Costa's family will cancel the wedding, and my sweet daughter will have no chance to live a life as magnificent as this one.
Lord Hugo waved a hand in a vague gesture that encompassed the fine furnishings in the room.
Stay, please. Tell me what is happening out there. Do your people still search for the highwayman?
They do. I sent Shaleslip's finest after them. They will not fail. I trust them implicitly.
I hope you are right. It will be impossible for me to rest well until the chest is recovered and my daughter's future is safe. Please, you must understand. The dowry is all we have left. Without it, we are no more than beggars. We could not even return to our home in Aberdeen because I sold everything I had to pay our way to Coires.
I understand, my lord. My men and I will do everything we can to recover your chest. I hope you will try to rest, though. for your daughter's sake. If you get some rest, you will heal faster, which will please her.
Thank you, sir. I will try.
Lord Hugo said, and Mr. Royse left. Jared Thatcher and Daniel Scott were Mr. Royse's most trusted and imposing footmen. Women admired their good looks, and their strength awed men. They were tall, with broad shoulders that seemed mitered at perfect 90-degree angles. They were the best of the best for any task, be it serving dinner to a large party or discouraging footpads in the market square. There was nothing the two men could not accomplish together when they set their minds to it.
Well, they did not get far, did they?
Jared said when he spotted the three men they had been tracking since early afternoon.
One of their horses has come up lame,
Daniel said, pointing at the highwayman standing near the bank of a creek and inspecting his horse's leg.
It hardly seems fair. 3 against 2,
Jared said.
I agree.
Daniel replied.
They haven't got a chance in hell.
Poor bastards,
Jared muttered. Daniel raised his pistol and fired a single shot into the air.
Lay down your weapons, he shouted. We have you surrounded.
The trio of highwaymen froze for one disbelieving moment, and then 2 of them scrambled into their saddles and rode off with the stolen chest. The third man screamed like a woman and hopped over the creek, pulling his limping horse along into the cover of the trees on the other side.
Never mind him,
Daniel said.
Let's go after the other 2.
Jared and Daniel kicked their horses, let out battle cries worthy of ancient warriors, and took up the chase. They fired more shots into the air to scare their prey, with fantastic results. The highwayman with the chest had not had time to secure it properly to his saddle. He held it down with one hand, extended awkwardly behind him, while his other hand gripped the reins. When the shots rang out, he covered his head with both hands, and the chest tumbled to the ground. It rolled twice and then burst open upon the rocks of the creek bed.
Whoa!
Jared shouted as he brought his horse to a stop.
This is what we are after. Those men are not coming back.
The chest remained locked, but both hinges had come loose in the tumble, allowing the jewelry in the first of many velvet trays to fall out. Daniel whistled appreciatively as he regarded the sparkling jewels scattered among the rocks.
What a fine treasure this is. It's a wonder the blighters didn't put up more of a fight for it.
Jared nodded in agreement.
In truth, they were the worst bunch of thieves I've ever seen. Were their pistols even loaded? They didn't fire a single shot.
Daniel shrugged, and he and Jared leapt off their horses to collect the jewels, pausing to inspect a particularly interesting piece.
Something strange is afoot,
Jared said.
Strange indeed.
Daniel agreed.
Hurry then. We'd best tell Mr. Royse.
Chapter 6.
Senor da Costa and Charlie have not returned. I think we must send someone after them,
Gregory said as he strode into the billiards room where Robert had spent a good portion of the day. Robert had done as Gregory wished and kept away from Opale. He had even resisted the urge to go to the music room when he heard her playing some of his favorite ballads with Marjorie.
Senor da Costa wanted to inspect your irrigation system in the North Fields. Do you want me to ride out after him?
Yes, I think you should. Jared and Daniel have not yet returned, and I do not want anyone out there alone after dusk. I am still perturbed you let the Senor go with only Charlie for protection.
I will go at once.
Mr. Jones entered at that moment and said,
Mr. Royse, sir, Mr. Thatcher and Mr. Scott have returned. They would like an immediate audience with you in your study.
Thank you, Jones. Robert, come with me. I want you to hear what they have to say before you leave.
When Gregory and Robert entered the study, the footman stood before Mr. Royce's desk, where the black chest sat in the middle.
You retrieved the chest. Excellent. What happened to the bandits?
Robert asked.
We got the jewels back, but we missed the thieves,
Jared explained.
We did not miss them,
Daniel corrected.
We let them go as soon as they dropped the chest. I doubt they will bother us any more.
Let's not worry about them for now. What matters is that you retrieved Lady Opal's dowry.
Gregory said.
Suppose the dowry turned out to be worthless.
Jared said, looking straight into Mr. Royce's eyes.
What do you mean?
Gregory and Robert said in unison.
Well, look at this piece.
Jared reached into the damaged chest and pulled out a necklace with a blue pendant the size of a quail's egg. The stone had a chip and the gold setting had scratches, which revealed the brass underneath. He handed it over to Mr. Royse.
As you can see, this is no sapphire.
Beautiful workmanship, but this looks like glass.
Gregory said as he inspected the piece.
What?
Robert looked over his shoulder, incredulous.
They are imitations.
Gregory said, handing the necklace to Robert.
How can this be?
Robert said as he scrutinized the piece.
If it was not for the chip, I could not tell.
Gregory walked around his desk and took a seat. He pulled the chest closer to him and carefully maneuvered the velvet trays through the gap in the broken lid, inspecting every single piece of jewelry. Robert watched in horrified silence without interrupting his cousin.
I am not an expert, but I would say these are all imitations. Exquisite work, but imitations nonetheless.
Gregory said after he had emptied the chest.
Robert, is this the same chest they took off the carriage?
I cannot be certain, as I only glimpsed it, but it looks like the same one. There is one sure way to find out. Why don't you ask Lord Hugo?
No, let's keep what we know to ourselves for the time being. Jared, take the chest and fix the hinges so Lord Hugo will suspect no one has looked within it.
Gregory said, replacing the trays as he spoke.
Daniel, you go with him. Make quick work of it.
It is peculiar, is it not?
Robert asked after the footman had left with the chest.
Indeed, I was just thinking about what Senor de Costa said.
Which part?
About there being no wedding if there is no dowry.
I wonder what will happen if he finds out the dowry is worthless,
Robert said. Gregory caught sight of his speculative expression and frowned.
Robert, you are not to entertain any notions of Lady Opal. I told you Portuguese tempers are legendary. Senor de Costa will tear you apart if you so much as look at her.
I heard you before, and I told you I would stay away from her. You already have my word.
Good. Now go find Senor de Costa. It is getting dark.
Robert found Charlie in the stables grooming Volo, one of Gregory's prize stallions, with his good arm, his injured arm still bound up in a sling but higher and tighter than it had been earlier in the day.
Charlie, what happened? Have you hurt yourself again? Where is Senor de Costa?
All is well, Colonel. I was all right when we set out, but after an hour or two my arm started aching, and I got awfully tired. Without me saying a word, Senor de Costa saw I wasn't feeling well and sent me back here. He's a proper gentleman, make no mistake. I left him with the foreman at the irrigation works. They were getting along famously. He's not at all as high and mighty as I expected royalty to be, and he said he would return by nightfall.
Robert blinked, hardly able to credit this favourable account of the Portuguese dom. Before he could form a coherent response, the man himself arrived.
Good evening, Colonel. I have just returned from inspecting your cousin's marvelous irrigation system,
Senor de Costa said. Charlie smiled and nodded pleasantly, touched by what he saw as the dom's enthusiastic praise of Mr. Royse and Shaleslip. By contrast, Robert, who had thought Dom André's pronouncement dripped with condescension, barely managed to stop his lips from curling up in a sneer.
I am sure Mr. Royse will be pleased you like it. I was just coming in search of you. Mr. Royse feared you could not find your way back to the house in the dark.
That is kind of Mr. Royse. Come, let us return to the great house so I may speak with him myself. I have many questions about his methods.
Robert followed a few paces behind Senor de Costa as they walked to the house. With particular intensity, he assessed the man who would marry Opal. He was the kind of man women fawned over, possessing wealth, power, and position. He could also be considered handsome with his lean stature and dark hair tied in a queue at the nape of his neck. He spoke smoothly and confidently, commanding attention, but Robert thought he detected a hard edge to his tone, which, if given provocation, could turn harsh and ugly. Jared and Daniel met them in the foyer. Jared offered Robert an almost imperceptible nod.
Senor da Costa, may I introduce you to Mr. Jared Thatcher and Mr. Daniel Scott? These are the men Mr. Royse sent after the highwaymen earlier today.
Ah, you have returned empty-handed?
Senor da Costa asked, his manner slightly deflated.
Well, not exactly. We got the chest back,
Daniel said.
And the highwaymen, did you have success in apprehending them also?
Senor da Costa further inquired.
No, they got away. Seems like they were more interested in saving their lives than they were in keeping the chest.
Jared said.
I shall never be able to thank you enough for your heroic efforts. If not for you, the dowry would be lost forever. If you will excuse me, Colonel, I must tell Lady Opale this wonderful news.
When the Dom was out of earshot, Robert said,
I wonder how he will feel when he finds out the dowry is worthless.
My dear Opale, have you heard? The dowry is recovered.
Senor da Costa said when he entered the drawing room and found her sitting alone with a book of French poetry.
Oh, Dom André, that is marvelous news. Now we need not fear that the wedding will be cancelled.
Opale said. She tossed her book aside as she leapt out of her seat and went to him. He was lost in his thoughts and hardly noticed her approach until she touched his arm and asked,
Does it not please you that my dowry is recovered?
Oh, of course it pleases me. Now our wedding plans can go forward without delay.
Come and sit with me. I have hardly seen you today. Where have you been?
I spent much of the day inspecting some of Shaleslip's farmland. Mr. Royse is an attentive master and has employed all the latest techniques. I have already learned much from him and will apply my new knowledge to my property when we return. I am afraid I cannot sit with you now. I must go to my rooms and wash.
Stay. You are not so dirty that you cannot sit and talk with me for a few minutes.
I would stay if it was our home, but I fear I will soil Mrs. Royce's lovely furnishings, and I have no wish to offend our hostess. I promise I will return.
I hope you will. Ever since we left Aberdeen, I scarcely see you. You go for rides by yourself. You take walks alone. Does it not occur to you I might want to accompany you?
Opale said.
I have much on my mind. You must not fret, my dear. There will be plenty of time for rides and walks after we are married in Coiras.
Sometimes I think it would have been much nicer if we had married in Scotland before we began this journey.
Opale sighed, her perfect lips forming a pretty pout.
At least then I would see you each night, even if I could not see you during the day.
We have already discussed this, my dear. My family will not recognize our marriage if we do not hold the ceremony in Coiras. They would turn us out as sinners, and my dear grandmother would die of shame. I must be seen to uphold all of my family's traditions. Now I really must leave you. It is nearly time to change for supper, and I want to tell your father of the dowry's recovery. I must not keep him waiting.
Does it not matter if I am kept waiting, day in and day out?
Opal's pout became more pronounced.
Petulance does not become you, Opale. Soon you will be my donna, and you must learn to be gracious at all times.
Stung by the reproof, Opale silently watched Dom André walk away from her. It seemed he did that a lot of late. Before they had left Aberdeen, Dom André had been gracious and attentive. They had taken long rides on horseback, spending hours getting to know one another and sharing their hopes for the future. He had walked the streets of Aberdeen with her on his arm, meeting all of her friends and telling them how fortunate he was to be marrying such a treasure. She had thought she was the fortunate one. She had found love despite her marriage being one of convenience. Now, however, as Dom André strode away from her once again, she was not so sure. Did he believe what he had said when they arrived? Did he think their marriage was only the alliance of two noble houses? Did love not matter to him? For the first time since her engagement, Opal felt sorrow. Had she not come to love Dom André, it may not have been so hard to learn of his true feelings regarding their marriage. But since she had already given him her heart, she deeply mourned that he would not give her his. The clacking of balls in the billiards room down the hall drew Opal from her gloomy thoughts. She glided towards the sound, her steps muffled by the luxurious carpet. When she neared the door, she paused and peered inside. There was Colonel Booth, alone, playing billiards in his shirt sleeves. She watched as he took a shot, the ball landing squarely in the corner pocket. His satisfaction showed in the slightest curve at one corner of his mouth. Opal thought his expression adorable, in a manly way, of course. She remembered the week they had spent together in Aberdeen. She had enjoyed his flattering attentions, though she had known they could come to nothing. He was the second son of an English earl, and she was the only daughter of a French marquis. Despite their hearts being touched, she, as a realist, knew that their love could never be because of their countries being at war. Seeing him now, relaxed as he was, made her appreciate the time they had spent together, but it did not make her long for him. She had never been in love with him, though she had once thought otherwise. What she had felt for him had been no more than childish infatuation. Now she knew what true love was and how it felt. She was glad she had trusted her father, for Dom André was just the sort of man who suited her.
Do you mind if I watch you play?
Opal said, stepping into the room, confident in her new understanding. Robert straightened abruptly and then bowed.
I do not mind at all, but perhaps we should join the others in the drawing room. I am sure you will be more comfortable there.
He set the cue aside and donned his jacket.
Oh no, I do not want to be a bother. I will leave you to your game. I am sure it would be quite a distraction to have someone watch.
You do not bother me. I only suggested we join the others because it would not be proper to be found here alone with me.
How very kind of you, Colonel Booth. I always knew you were a true gentleman. How about hitting just one more ball, so I may see you play, and then we will do as you say and sit in the drawing room until supper is announced.
Very well,
Robert said. He picked up his cue and lined up a shot. He struck the cue ball and sent it spinning across the table, missing every ball on the table, including the one he was aiming for. The cue ball hit the lip of the table with enough force to send it bouncing up and over the side. It hit the floor with a dull thud and rolled to a stop at the toe of Opal's right slipper. Opal laughed.
Colonel, I am not proficient, but I am certain that was not how it was supposed to go. Are you sure I do not bother you?
Her tone was carefree and cheerful as she gracefully bent down to pick up the wayward ball.
The ball obviously found your attractions irresistible,
Robert teased her.
I had little to do with the path it chose.
The ball has good taste then,
she said with an impish smile, holding the ball out to him.
Thank you,
Robert said. Their hands touched when he took it from her.
Shall we go to the drawing room now?
Opal asked.
Yes, please go ahead. I will meet you there in a minute.
As you wish,
she said as she turned and left the room. Chapter 7.
Dom André, fortune smiles on an old man. Opal's dowry was recovered. Mr. Royse just brought it back to me.
Lord Hugo said with little enthusiasm. If some of those gathered around him thought his excitement lacking, they attributed it to his condition.
Yes, I know. I came to tell you before supper, but you were asleep.
Dom André replied.
We are all fortunate indeed.
But I am especially glad you are recovering so rapidly, Lord Hugo.
Well, the de Dampierre family is as resilient as it is distinguished. Opal will give you healthy, hearty children.
And I will name my first son Geraldo in your honor.
Please do not speak of such things in front of me,
Opal said, her cheeks overspread with a crimson blush as the two men bantered back and forth, determined not to be outdone by the other.
Why not, my child? A man in Dom André's position must know his wife will bear him strong children.
It pains me to hear you speak of it, because Dom André seems to regret his betrothal pledge to me.
No, that is not true,
Senor de Costa gently assured her.
You are a prize to be cherished above all others. A man could not hope for a more charming or beautiful wife.
If you find me so attractive, why do you not suggest a stroll in the moonlight? It is a lovely night, and it is proper as we are engaged.
Opal looked at Senor de Costa expectantly. She longed for nothing more than to spend time alone with him as they had in Aberdeen, but he seemed entirely disinterested as of late.
To walk in the moonlight with a beautiful woman such as you is too much temptation for a mortal man like myself,
Senor de Costa said smoothly.
Bravo, Dom André. You are a true gentleman,
Lord Hugo said.
Sometimes I would wish you were not,
Opal muttered as she crossed her arms and resorted to pouting again.
I am sorry, my love, but a moonlight stroll is out of the question tonight. I need my rest. Tomorrow morning I plan to leave early for Coiras.
Leave? Without us?
Opal asked, crestfallen. He was leaving her and had not even had the decency to consult her before deciding.
Well, your father cannot travel for a few days yet, and after that he must take it slow. I have been away from my home for such a long time now. I fear my men are growing lazy and neglectful in my continued absence. If I hire a horse and ride ahead, I can catch the boat we originally planned to sail on, or even book passage on a different ship that leaves earlier. Then you and your father can follow as soon as he is well, and I will have everything ready for your arrival.
You are thinking logically, of course,
said Lord Hugo.
Logic!
Opal scoffed.
What has logic to do with it? If you have already been away so long, what are another few days? That speaks of logic also, does it not?
Opal, my dear, it is late. Today's events have exhausted you and your father. We will discuss this in the morning before I leave. Lord Hugo, you must not leave these jewels out in the open. Surely Mr. Royse has a strong room to lock them in. Shall I ask him?
No,
Lord Hugo cried.
that is, I mean to say, I cannot bear to part with the chest so soon after its recovery. Please put it under the bed. No one will see it there.
Of course, if you insist there, it is done. Is there anything else I can do for you? Are you quite comfortable now?
It is a little warm. Perhaps you could open the window and let in the cool breeze, and get my pistol from my bag so I may have it at hand should the thieves return. Make sure you load it. There's a good man. What would we do without you?
Lord Hugo turned to his daughter and said,
He is right, Opal. It is late and we are both tired. Good night, Dom André.
Until tomorrow, Lord Hugo.
Senor de Costa bowed and then took Opal's hand and kissed it.
My dreams will be only of you.
Opal stood where she was and refused to even look at him. He was an enigma. He spoke pretty words of love and devotion, but then, in another moment, he was entirely indifferent to her, and the moment after that, he was kissing her hand with such tenderness that her heart fluttered in her breast.
Opal, come here.
Lord Hugo waved his daughter over to the bed next to him. Opal sat on the edge and took the hand he held out to her.
I am afraid you offended him.
I meant to, Papa. He is so cold and aloof. He is nothing like he was in Aberdeen. What has happened to him?
Perhaps your young and romantic heart expects too much. Remember, my child, arranged marriages like these do not always begin with the love you crave, but it will come in time.
I know you are right, Papa, but I thought we had a real connection in Aberdeen. Where did it go?
Dom Andre has much on his mind. He has been cooped up in a carriage for almost a week, and we still have another week of travel ahead of us before we get to the boat, where he will be cooped up again. Men like him need space and freedom, a place to run wild and free. What is more important to me is that he can offer you what I cannot. A large house like this one, wealth, security, servants to do your bidding.
And security for you too, Papa. This is one reason I like Dom Andre. When I said I could not bear the thought of you living alone, he insisted you come and live with us.
That is nothing.
Lord Hugo said, patting Opal's hand.
Only you matter, my child.
You matter to me, Papa.
You are a dear girl, my Opal.
Lord Hugo clasped Opal's hand and kissed it as only a loving father could.
Please try not to upset him.
Very well, I will try.
Good. Now leave me to rest.
Are you sure you do not want me to stay with you? What if you should need help in the night?
No, my child, you get some rest. I will be fine. I am determined to get well so we do not have to impose upon the Royses' hospitality for too long. And so we can get you to Coiras to marry Dom Andre, of course.
Very well, if you insist. Good night, Papa.
Opal took a moment to straighten the bed covers before kissing her father's forehead, blowing out the candle, and leaving him to rest.
What a day this has been,
Marjorie said when her husband entered her bedroom in his housecoat, his hounds prancing around his feet. She laid down her silver hairbrush and turned around in her chair to look at him. He seemed preoccupied.
What is it, Gregory? What is bothering you?
Do you have your sapphire necklace?
Yes.
May I see it?
Gregory asked.
Of course, but why?
Marjorie asked. She took a key from her drawer and unlocked the jewelry box, her eyes sparkling with interest.
I want to inspect the setting.
Is there something wrong with it?
Marjorie asked, concern evident in her tone.
Not at all. I only wanted to compare it to another sapphire necklace I saw this evening. I believe the de Dampierre jewels are counterfeits.
Counterfeits?
I wanted to inspect some real jewels to ensure I am not mistaken.
Please explain yourself. Do you mean the thieves replaced the jewellery with counterfeit pieces?
Marjorie's dark brows furrowed with worry.
I do not know. That would require a great deal of knowledge and planning on their part. All I know for certain is that the dowry chest is full of brass, paste, and glass, and either the bride or the groom is being swindled, perhaps both.
What do you propose to do about it?
I must look into the matter further. I want to be sure of the facts before I say anything that might cause either party to do something they will regret. In addition, presently, we do not know who to tell. If we tell Senor de Costa, he may cancel the wedding, and Lord Hugo will blame us. If we tell Lord Hugo, he may try to make us complicit in deceiving Senor de Costa, so the wedding can go forward. Even if he claims the chest contained the authentic pieces before it was stolen, Senor de Costa may still break the engagement.
Marjorie frowned, imagining a variety of confrontations, none of which ended well.
This sort of intrigue is beyond my experience. How do you plan to act?
Do you remember Mr. Knox?
Of course.
I sent him a message to meet me in Shalebury tomorrow morning. He spent some time in France as an action agent for the British Secret Service. I want to discern what he knows about de Dampierre's life in France. I also plan to corner Robert tomorrow. He may know more about the de Dampierres than he's saying.
Chapter 8.
I heard a shot. Are you all right, Lord Hugo?
Gregory cried as he came running into Lord Hugo's room with his barking hounds at his heels. He held his dressing gown closed with one hand while gripping his pistol at the ready in the other. Marjorie came behind her husband but stopped just outside the door, barely daring to peek into the room for fear of being shot. Robert ran up the hallway from his room, hastily pulling his trousers up under his nightshirt.
Robert, go check outside.
Gregory directed as his hounds ran to the window and barked at the drapes billowing in the evening breeze. Opal stood beside her father's bed, an ornate pistol clutched in her shaking hands. Lord Hugo appeared unharmed, if a little frightened out of his wits.
What happened in here?
Gregory demanded.
The window!
Opal shrieked.
A man came in through the window.
Gregory ran across the room to the open window and leaned out. There, in the shadows of the trees at the edge of the gardens, were 3 men fleeing Shaleslip Manor on horseback. It would be impossible to get word to Robert of their direction in time to catch them. Marjorie rushed into the room to Opal's side and gently took the pistol from her, setting it on the bedside table.
What happened? Are you all right?
Opal looked at her with wide, fearful eyes.
I could not sleep. And then I thought I heard voices outside and noises in Papa's room. I came in to see if he needed me, and I espied a man climbing through the window. I was so frightened that I took Papa's pistol from the table and shot at him. Did I get him? Did I shoot the thief?
No, but you certainly could not have missed him by more than an inch or 2.
Gregory pointed out the splintered wood of the window frame where the bullet had struck.
You missed. Ah.
Lord Hugo sighed, sinking back against his pillows.
I am sorry, Papa.
Opal said as she sat on the bed next to him and took his hand in hers.
Do not be sorry, dear girl. You are very brave, but I am rather glad you have no blood on your hands.
The important thing is the dowry is safe. The thief dropped it before he escaped through the window.
Gregory bent and retrieved the chest from the floor. He carried it over to Lord Hugo and set it on the bed next to him.
The thief must have climbed up the ivy, though how he knew which window was yours, I cannot guess.
What is going on in here?
Senor de Costa said upon entering the room.
Dom André, did you not hear my father's pistol?
His pistol? No, I did not hear a pistol. I was sound asleep in my bed until those infernal dogs awakened me. Do they never stop barking? Oh, begging your pardon, Mr. Royse. I did not see you there. They are fine dogs, truly.
The thieves returned for Opal's dowry. They must be fiercely determined to have it if they would risk breaking into this immense house.
Lord Hugo said.
And did they succeed? Did they take it? Or is it still safe?
It is safe.
Lord Hugo patted the top of the chest.
If you will excuse me, I must see if my cousin has discovered anything.
Gregory said.
Mrs. Royse, please come with me. Lady Opal, please remain with your father until we return.
Of course, Mr. Royse. I will stay right here and watch over him. Have you any more bullets, Papa?
Once they had gone some distance from Lord Hugo's room, Gregory came to an abrupt stop, his hounds bumping into him from behind.
What is it, Gregory? Why have we stopped?
Marjorie asked, giving an apologetic pat to the hound whose paw she had just stepped on.
I think someone staged it.
What was staged?
The theft.
The first attempt or the second?
Both.
But why? Why would anyone play such a horrible prank?
When we find Robert, I will explain.
Shaleslip Manor was in commotion when the Royses arrived downstairs. The night footman had heard the shot, and not knowing where it had come from, had gone to the back of the house to investigate. He too had noticed the 3 men fleeing and was swift to take action. Even before Robert had come downstairs, he had woken Jared, Daniel, and Mr. Jones. Jared and Daniel had set out after the highwaymen, while Mr. Jones and Robert woke more of the staff and set men to guard the house and grounds. The Royses found Robert in the kitchen, helping the butler devise a guard duty roster with military precision.
Robert, leave that to Jones and come with me to the library. I want to speak with you and Marjorie.
Robert obeyed without comment and kept his questions to himself until the library door was shut behind them.
Gregory, how did they know which room was Lord Hugo's? There are over 200 windows in this house, yet they got it right on the first try. How did they know where to find the chest?
Gregory's expression was grim.
They must have an ally within the house.
You don't think it is Lord Hugo, do you?
I am not sure. Regardless of whether Lord Hugo knows the contents of the chest are worthless, what would he gain by having it stolen? His distress over the loss of the dowry and the fear that Senor de Costa will not marry his daughter are genuine,
Gregory said.
What of Senor de Costa?
Marjorie asked quietly.
It is possible. He could have told the highwaymen to attack on the southern road, and he could have got word to them which room was Lord Hugo's.
But he hasn't left the house since we recovered the jewels,
Robert pointed out.
Also, why would he want to steal the dowry? He will get it legally as soon as he marries Lady Opale.
It is useless to speculate. We simply do not have enough information.
What do you think we should do?
I think we must wait for Jared and Daniel to return before we decide. Robert, will you stay up and await their return? Marjorie, come upstairs with me and we'll see to Lord Hugo and his daughter. I will think about what is to be done tomorrow.
Chapter 9. When Gregory and Marjorie returned to Lord Hugo's room, Senor de Costa was standing at the window looking into the darkness beyond, and Lady Opale was watching with great interest as her father reloaded his pistol.
They do not give up easily, these highwaymen,
Senor de Costa was saying.
I think you should keep this window closed and locked from now on. I am sorry I opened it earlier for you. I never dreamt anyone could get into the room that way. For heaven's sake, we are on an upper floor,
he said as he closed and latched the window.
What are we to do if the men will not leave us alone?
Opale asked. The anxiety in her voice was palpable.
Do not fear, my dear,
Senor de Costa said, stifling a yawn.
Look outside. Mr. Royse has posted guards around the house to keep us protected.
I have indeed,
Gregory said.
I have increased the night watch tenfold for the safety of everyone. Nothing like this has ever happened before, but they will not catch us off guard again.
I am glad to hear it. Well, for the second time, I shall say good night. Until tomorrow, my friends.
Senor de Costa bowed to the party and headed towards the door.
Wait, Dom Andre!
Opale hurried to him before he could leave the room.
I hope what has happened has changed your mind about leaving tomorrow. Without us, Papa cannot protect us in his weakened condition. We need you to remain with us.
You are right, of course. I promise I will not leave until we may all travel to Coiras together. I am ashamed I ever considered leaving ahead of you.
Thank you, Dom Andre. You are very good to Papa and me.
Opale stepped quite close to him and turned her face upwards. She longed for him to kiss her, even if it was only on the cheeks in the European fashion. Dom Andre planted a perfunctory kiss on her forehead and left the room before she could protest. Opale crossed her arms and pouted as she watched him walk away.
What is wrong with Dom Andre?
She asked peevishly.
I don't know what you mean.
Lord Hugo said.
He seems just the same as he always is.
No, he has changed. Do you think he no longer loves me?
Opal's protruding lower lip trembled.
Of course he loves you, my pretty.
Lord Hugo said, laying his reloaded pistol in his lap.
What do you think, Mrs. Royse? You are a woman. I would like your opinion. Just now, he refused to kiss me. What kind of man refuses to kiss his fiancé? Is something wrong with me?
There is nothing wrong with you, Lady Opal. You know how men are, constantly worried about those they love most.
Marjorie answered.
Come, let me help you to your room. You should get some rest. Your father needs his rest too. Mr. Royse will see he is taken care of.
Mr. Royse, will you please see he goes to sleep? I am anxious he will stay up all night and then not have the strength he needs to recover.
Opal said as she followed Marjorie out.
I shall be happy to see that he goes to sleep. I have already called for a nurse to sit with him for the rest of the night.
Thank you,
Opal replied.
Good night, Papa. Good night, Mr. Royse.
Good night,
Lord Hugo said, waving to her as she left the room. Gregory waited for the door to close before he spoke again.
You've had quite a scare. Are you truly all right, Lord Hugo? You may speak freely now without fear of distressing your daughter.
I am all right. I am perhaps embarrassed that my sweet girl had the presence of mind to use my pistol before I did.
Lord Hugo patted the weapon and then set it on the bedside table.
Pretty as it is, it was never meant for her hand.
It is a handsome piece,
Gregory said, admiring the gold inlay and intricately engraved silver adorning mount, lock, stock, and barrel.
Is it the work of Patrick Gunner?
You flatter me, sir. I did it myself in imitation of a gunner piece. It is a hobby of mine, or it was before I lost my fortune. Perhaps when my Opal is married, I may take it up again.
Gregory inspected the ornate weapon again, a large piece of the puzzle falling firmly into place. Opal lay in bed, tossing and turning on the luxurious mattress. Despite being exhausted by the events of this never-ending day, Opal couldn't fall asleep. Worries about her dowry and the persistent highwaymen plagued her. She also worried about her father's condition. Most of all, she worried that Dom André no longer cared for her and regretted his decision to marry her. He was acting so strangely. It was not all in her imagination. After all the time they spent together in Aberdeen and in the carriage during their long journey, she thought she knew him better than she knew anyone except her father. The fear and anxiety she had felt when her father told her he had selected a husband for her had disappeared upon days of meeting him. Her future husband had turned out to be a kind, gentle, and loving man, and she counted the days until the wedding. Where had that man gone? Why had he deserted her? Giving up on sleep, Opal put on her dressing gown and went downstairs. The house was still buzzing with activity. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs and observed the servants bustling around under the direction of Colonel Booth, who wore a crumpled robe over his nightshirt and yet looked entirely at ease leading people into battle against those who dared breach Shaleslip Manor's walls without permission.
Lady Opal, what are you doing down here? Should you not be in bed?
Robert asked when he saw her.
I could not sleep. I thought a turn about the house would do me good.
How is your father?
Robert asked as he leaned casually against the banister next to her.
He is fine. Your cousin is seeing that he sleeps now.
That is good. He needs his rest so he can heal.
Opal rested her hand on a baluster, tracing the pattern carved into the wood.
Colonel Booth, you do not think the thieves will return tonight, do you?
No, I do not think so.
I hope not.
They would be foolish if they did. 20 men are watching the grounds, including extras standing guard outside your father's window.
That is very kind of you, to take such special care of Papa. I appreciate it,
Opal said.
Your family has been extremely kind to us. I am glad you brought us here.
She looked up at Robert through her long golden lashes and smiled prettily at him.
You are welcome. I hope I am not being too forward, but may I ask you a personal question?
Yes, you may ask me anything.
Are you happy with your engagement to Senor da Costa?
Opal stood silent for a long time, which made Robert uneasy.
I am sorry, I should not have asked. Because of our prior acquaintance, I thought—
It is all right, Colonel. I know you mean well. A week ago, I would have been confident answering your question, but today I am no longer certain.
How can a beautiful woman like you want to marry a man who is only interested in her dowry?
I do wonder of late if Dom André is more interested in the dowry than in me, but it is not my place to question him. My father arranged the match, and he knows what is best for me.
Well, I know what I would do if I were in his place.
In my father's place?
Opal asked, confused.
No, in Senor de Costa's place.
What would you do, Colonel?
Never mind. Forget I said anything.
Tell me.
Opal said a little imperiously. Robert's eyes lingered on Opal's lips, but then he shook his head and moved a step backwards.
I cannot. I gave my word.
Opal was a little shocked when she came to understand his meaning. A blush overspread her features, and she was about to tease and scold Robert for his forwardness when she beheld Dom André come out of the library not far away. He had not noticed her and Robert yet, but he would in a heartbeat. She assessed Robert and Dom André and made a decision.
Kiss me,
Opal whispered.
What?
Taking matters into her own hands, Opal grabbed him by the lapels and pressed her lips to his. She did not have any experience kissing men, yet it was not unpleasant, and she would have let it go on indefinitely had Robert not pulled away with a startled oath. Opal opened her eyes and looked for Dom André. He was still there, examining a painting, and as far as she could tell, he had not witnessed her little display. It amazed her she could blatantly disregard propriety, no more than 20 feet from her fiancé, and he would be oblivious to it. As the Dom turned in her direction, Opal took a deep breath, her bosom heaving in her flimsy dressing gown, and pulled the spluttering Robert in for another kiss. Her eyes were wide open this time as she searched Dom André's face for any sign of jealousy.
Good evening, Opal. Colonel Booth.
Dom André said calmly. Robert pulled away more forcefully this time, his face crimson with mortification.
Dom André, please forgive me.
Opal stammered.
Forgive you? For what? Colonel Booth is a mortal man. It takes a strong character to resist carnal lust. You are very beautiful, Opal. The temptation simply proved too great for him. You are not to blame.
Dom André gave the smallest shrug of his shoulders before moving past the couple to climb the stairs. Incredulous, Opal cried after him,
Dom André, the Colonel took advantage of me. Will not you defend my honor?
Oh, very well. But can it wait until morning? I am too tired tonight.
Dom André reached the top of the stairs and turned toward his room, never looking back.
That is a Portuguese temper,
Robert said when he could finally speak.
I thought, at the very least, he would strike me. He did not even raise his voice. Is the man made of ice?
I have never been so insulted in my entire life,
Opal exclaimed. It was all she could do to keep from screaming in frustration. Turning back to Robert, she slapped him hard and then ran up to her room, leaving him rubbing his cheek and staring at her retreating figure, entirely bewildered. Chapter 10. The next morning, before breakfast, Gregory called for his horse to be saddled and rode to the Shaleslip Inn. Upon entering, Gregory crossed the commons area to where a lone man sat in the corner, waiting for him. Freddie Knox was dressed like a London toff, which was quite different from the shabby workman's clothes Gregory had last seen him wearing.
Thank you for meeting me, Mr. Knox. May I buy you breakfast?
Gregory asked when he sat down across the table from the man.
I never say no to a free breakfast. It has been days since I ate a proper meal.
Freddie Knox replied, as Gregory waved Charlie's sister Lucy over to take their order.
My current client is running me ragged, investigating every bachelor in the entirety of England. His daughter is in her 3rd season, and he is determined to have her married and settled. I shall be overjoyed when the season is in full swing.
Good morning, Mr. Royse. It's a pleasure to see you here,
Lucy said when she reached the table, bobbing a curtsy to both gentlemen.
I've not seen you since Johnny Hale's funeral. How have you been?
Gregory inquired of the girl.
I am a little better now. Thank you for asking. My spirits are still low, but hard work keeps the tears at bay. My mother says I will rally soon. I just need a little more time. It is never easy losing someone you love.
Gregory listened with fascination as Lucy spoke. He wondered how many girls had been in love with the dashing young footman, and how many hearts had been broken from Shalebury to London upon his heroic death.
Her beau died?
Freddie asked when Lucy had gone to give their order to the cook.
He was the brave footman who was killed protecting my sister.
Oh, I see.
Freddie lowered his eyes and studied his hands on the table. He still regretted the part he had played in that sordid business.
Have no fear, Mr. Knox. I have not asked you here for recriminations.
Gregory lowered his voice so only Freddie could hear him and said,
I need some information.
I have plenty of that. What would you like to know?
Have you heard about the carriage heist on the Southern Road yesterday?
It's all the locals are talking about. The coachman came through the village yesterday, warning everyone to be on the lookout for highwaymen. He put on quite a show, I hear. Seems rather peculiar, do not you think?
More peculiar than you know,
Gregory replied. Their conversation was interrupted when Lucy returned with a coffee tray to serve them. Gregory waited until she was gone before he spoke again.
Have you ever heard of a Frenchman by the name of Prince du Saint-Gérard de Dampierre, Marquis of Hugo?
Yes, I've heard of him. He fled France with his daughter and settled in Scotland about 15 years ago. His wife was one of Napoleon's spies, and her political antics made his life rather difficult back then. I met her once, in a professional capacity, so to speak. She almost ruined my career.
Before Gregory could ask for a detailed account of Freddie's acquaintance with the Marchioness de Dampierre, Lucy arrived with their breakfast. It seemed to Gregory she was remarkably slow in getting everything arranged on the table.
Will there be anything else, sir?
Despite being irritated by the interruption, Gregory kindly said,
No, that will be all.
Another patron called Lucy away, and Gregory returned his attention to Freddie, who had already dug into his food. Though he was still curious about how Freddie had met the Marchioness, he decided the telling of that tale could wait. He had more pressing concerns at the moment.
What do you know about the de Dampierre jewels?
An exquisite collection. They were worth a mighty fortune at one time.
What do you mean, at one time?
It is a long story that has to do with those political antics I mentioned.
If it is a long story, perhaps we should eat first.
Thank you, Mr. Royse. I am dreadfully hungry.
Robert was just opening the front door to go for a stroll when Opal came down the stairs.
Good morning,
Robert said cautiously. He was unsure how she would respond after last night's kissing incident and did not want to upset her or encourage more wild behavior. For his part, he was still trying to decide how he felt about the whole fiasco.
Good morning,
Opal replied cordially.
May I walk out with you?
Robert bowed and held the door for her. They walked out together, though Robert did not offer his arm, nor did she reach for it.
I must apologize for my indiscretion last night,
Opal began.
It was entirely my fault. I did not mean to slap you. I was angry at Dom André. I knew he was there, and I kissed you to make him jealous. I have decided I am not going to marry him. I cannot marry a man who thinks nothing of finding his fiancé in the arms of another man.
I must admit, I would not have taken it so lightly myself.
No, I am sure you would not. It is obvious Dom André has no feelings for me. While I did not expect him to love me after such a brief acquaintance, I thought he cared at least a little, even if for nothing more than his pride.
Robert stopped on the far side of the drive before the entrance to the topiary garden.
Have you told Senor de Costa that you have changed your mind about marrying him?
No, I have yet to see him this morning. Do you know where he is?
Mr. Jones told me he asked for a horse to be saddled a few hours ago. I imagine he is out riding around the estate again.
So early and alone as usual,
Opal said, the tinge of hurt unmistakable in her voice.
He told Jones he wished to ride alone to study my cousin's estate improvements at length, without inconveniencing anyone.
I see he has also forgotten that he was to defend my honor this morning. Well, there is no point in further delay. I will go speak to my father again. I told him about last night, and he...
You told him about last night? Are you sure that was wise?
Of course, I tell my father everything. He was glad to hear that Dom André planned to stand up for my honor. He would not like to do it himself. He likes you very much and would not care to kill you, but just in case... He had me summon the coachman so that he could prepare to act as Papa's second.
Robert barely suppressed a snort of laughter.
How prudent of him. I like your father too. I would not care to be killed by him either. Am I right in assuming you did not tell him you orchestrated the entire charade?
No, that would hurt him greatly. He will be upset enough by my decision not to marry Dom André, but I hope he will support me, especially when I tell him how lightly Dom André takes his responsibilities.
Opal turned back towards Shaleslip, with Robert a few paces behind. Just as she reached the steps, Senor de Costa trotted around the corner of the house on the same horse he had borrowed the day before. Opal halted her progress and watched as he pulled up his horse and dismounted on the drive.
I shall never tire of riding around your cousin's magnificent estate, Colonel. I have learned much of Shaleslip and how to better my property when I return.
Opal let out an exasperated breath and stomped up the front steps.
My dear Opal, in some way unknown to me, I have offended you. I offer my apologies.
Your words are a further insult, Dom André. You know perfectly well why I am cross with you. It does not matter now. I have something to tell you.
I shall give you my undivided attention, my dove, but before you speak, there is something that I am forced to do.
Senor de Costa tugged off of his gloves, walked up to Robert, and slapped him with such force Robert was sure even the stitches in the seams would be imprinted on his cheek. With a haughty sniff, Senor de Costa dropped his gloves at Robert's feet.
Stop! What are you doing?
Opal cried as she pushed herself between the men and held them apart with her outstretched arms. The excitement in her expression revealed her abject pleasure in the sudden turn events had taken.
Stop? But I thought this is what you wanted. Regardless, I cannot stop. The gauntlet has been thrown, and I will have redress.
All right. How do you want to do it?
Robert asked.
Pistols, foils, fisticuffs?
Robert hoped the Dom would choose fisticuffs. He had done a lot of thinking since Opal's theatrics of the night before and concluded that he would rather not die for her after all.
I demand satisfaction to restore my honor and my dear Opal's. It would be rude to kill you while I am a guest in your cousin's house, so I challenge you to fisticuffs. Right here, right now.
Oh, very well then, I accept.
Robert hoped he didn't sound too relieved.
Opal, my dear, step out of the way. I do not wish for you to be harmed.
Dom André took her by the elbow and led her a few paces away. Opal looked on with keen interest, clapping her hands in girlish glee. A footman was waved over from the house to lead the horse away, and the two gentlemen squared off. Senor de Costa made the first move, landing a blow to Robert's jaw that bowled him over backwards. Robert leapt back to his feet just in time to catch another blow. The second punch was every bit as powerful as the first, and Robert tottered backwards, but he kept himself upright by grabbing hold of Senor de Costa's arm.
Like that, is it?
Robert grunted as he swung a fist at Senor de Costa. catching him in the jaw.
Fetch Mrs. Royse!
Opal shouted at the footman holding the horse. She had not expected the two to actually start pummeling each other, but now that they had, she thought the spectacle deserved a larger audience. Robert dodged Senor de Costa's next punch, the Dom's momentum carrying him too far forward and leaving him off balance. Robert swept Don Andre's legs out from under him, sending him sprawling to the ground.
Be careful, man. You will soil your nice suit,
Robert chided.
Well, that is life. What is a soiled suit compared to giving you a proper thrashing?
Who is thrashing whom?
Marjorie Royse came running out of the house, trailed by the footmen Jared and Daniel, as well as Mr. Jones.
What is happening? Why are they fighting?
Colonel Booth kissed me last night, and now Dom Andre is reclaiming his honor,
Opal said, as if men coming to blows over her were the most common occurrence in the world.
What do you want us to do, Mrs. Royse?
Jared asked.
Let them fight.
Marjorie sighed.
We will not interrupt unless it gets out of hand. Colonel Booth got himself into this mess. He can get himself out of it.
I hope he is not injured,
Opal said fretfully.
I cannot allow him to be hurt because of me.
Marjorie gave her a shrewd look.
Please, if you would, tell me which gentleman you are referring to. Are you most worried about Colonel Booth or Senor de Costa?
Dom Andre, of course. I am worried about my fiancé.
Opal watched the two men continue their battle of wills, cringing as her intended went sprawling again. Although the bruises already forming on his handsome face dismayed her, Opal was happy that he had stood up for her and challenged Colonel Booth. Perhaps he loved her still. No one, not even Lord Hugo's nurse, could resist the pull of excitement. While the entire staff of Shaleslip gathered at the windows or corners of the house to watch the fight in the front drive, the three highwaymen ran from the trees, through the open expanse of the field, and then tiptoed through the kitchen herb garden to the back of the house. They crept in through the deserted kitchen and went upstairs to the second floor undetected. One man stopped at the top of the stairs to keep watch, while the other two continued down the hall towards Lord Hugo's room. They counted the doors until they found the right one and went inside. Without firing a shot or speaking a word, they accomplished their goal. They crept back out with the dowry chest a moment later, collected their cohort at the top of the stairs, and left the house as quickly and quietly as they had entered it. It was rare that someone so equally matched Robert in physical strength, endurance, and skill. Bruised and winded, lying in the gravel with a twisted knee, he rather wished this was not one of those times. The longer the fight went on, the less attractive he thought the prize. Still, he would put on a good show for Opal's sake. He owed her that much. Robert grabbed Senor de Costa's foot, pulled him to the ground beside him, and swung his good leg over him to get the advantage.
You are a worthy opponent, Senor de Costa,
Robert grunted as he thrust an elbow into the Dom's ribs.
As are you, Colonel Booth, though I expected as much from a military man such as yourself.
Dom Andre threw his own elbow, catching Robert in the abdomen. Robert rolled away, winded.
I confess, I was not expecting you to put up much of a fight,
he said as he got to his feet, keeping his weight on his good leg.
I have trained with a champion prize fighter. If I were not a gentleman, I could make a fortune in the ring.
The men circled each other again, Robert hobbling on his hurt leg as they took a moment to catch their breath.
Trained with a prize fighter, you say? I thought royalty would have more sense than to engage in such displays.
I may be descended from royalty, but I am a simple man like you, Colonel.
You think me simple? You do not know me very well.
Robert lunged at Dom Andre, catching him around the waist and tackling him to the ground.
Robert!
Marjorie shouted as the men struggled to their feet again.
I think each of you has made your point. It is time this ends.
Robert glanced in her direction, his gaze coming to rest on Opal standing beside her. She flashed the briefest of smiles, eyes shining with gratitude, and gave him an almost imperceptible nod. When next Dom André's fist came at him, he did not evade it. It was a poorly aimed glancing blow with little strength behind it, but Robert spun around and hit the ground as if felled by a giant, and there he stayed. Opale rushed to Dom André. Stroking his battered face, she said,
Dom André, you fought for me, and you won.
Colonel Booth,
Senor da Costa wheezed.
You were a worthy opponent. You took your beating gracefully.
And you have regained your honor,
Robert said. He got to his feet and shook the Dom's proffered hand before limping to the front steps and taking a hard seat. Never had he expended so much energy to lose a fight, and all for a woman who loved another. Chapter 11.
What is going on here?
Gregory said when he arrived and found the battered men and gawking servants.
We just witnessed a duel of sorts,
Marjorie said as she looked up at her husband, who still sat atop his horse.
Senor da Costa was defending his honor.
You all watched?
Gregory looked around him at the assemblage outside and at the windows. Only a few groundskeepers and herdsmen were absent.
Everyone in the house?
Mr. Royse, it was a terrible fight, but my Dom André was magnificent,
Opal said with pride.
I was not so bad myself,
Robert put in.
Your cousin is a worthy opponent. I have my satisfaction,
Senor da Costa said.
Indeed,
Gregory said, frowning at his cousin, who gave him a helpless look accompanied by a shrug.
While you two were fighting, I don't suppose anyone noticed the 3 men riding off with the dowry chest,
he said, pointing in the direction he had just seen the thieves fleeing.
My dowry chest,
Opal said, confused.
Yes, your dowry chest.
Gregory replied.
Opal,
Lord Hugo cried as he stumbled out of the house.
the thieves returned. I could not stop them. They took your dowry again.
My congratulations, Lord Hugo. Your robbery was finally a success,
Gregory said. Lord Hugo stopped on the stairs and stared at Gregory.
My robbery? Your loose words are insulting, sir. I demand you retract them and send someone after those thieves. You are letting them get away.
Let us be honest with each other, my lord. I know you are the mastermind behind the theft. You tried twice before, and today you finally had your daughter's dowry stolen for good. We will not go after it again.
Why would he do that?
Senor da Costa asked, turning puzzled eyes on the Marquis.
This is preposterous. Papa, tell him he is wrong.
When Lord Hugo remained silent, Opal looked him in the eye and witnessed the truth there.
Papa, how could you?
She whimpered.
I had to.
He said with an air of defeat.
The jewels are all fake.
Fake?
Yes, they are copies I made before I sold the real ones. Your mother left me no choice.
My mother? Papa, you are making no sense. Tell me what you mean.
Lord Hugo let out a slow breath and sat on the stairs next to Robert, who clasped him on the shoulder supportively. The Marquis looked at him sorrowfully and then returned his attention to his daughter.
I lost most of the family fortune during the revolution. Though our circumstances were greatly reduced, we had kept our heads and your dowry, the family jewels. I had faith that I could rebuild the de Dampierre fortune, but then your mother disappeared. I sold some jewelry to fund the search for her. It took almost 2 years, but eventually I found her. She had fallen in with a nasty bunch who did not want her to be found. They made threats against me, against you. Horrible, horrible threats.
He trailed off, passing a hand over his eyes as if to wipe away the memory. When he had collected himself, he cleared his throat and continued.
I sold more of the family jewels to get us safely out of the country. I had to pay off a lot of people to make our escape. When we arrived in Scotland, I had to sell more of your dowry to buy food and shelter for us until I could find work. But a few of our troubles had followed us from France. You would not remember, as you were too young, but they made 2 attempts to abduct you while I was away from the house. I had to pay someone to watch over you, and so I was never able to get ahead until you grew old enough to work with me. I was just getting our finances back under control when Colonel Booth came into our lives.
Colonel Booth? What does he have to do with this?
Opal looked at Robert, bewildered.
I did not think you knew,
Robert said to Lord Hugo.
I did not at first. You had been 4 days in the neighborhood before I received word from an old friend in Paris that they had captured my wife in Belgium.
I never realized, and I watched you and your daughter night and day during that week.
You spied on us.
Opal gasped.
I was following orders. My superior thought your father was involved in your mother's, troubles.
I was not. My friend is, or was, I should say. They sent the message to the milliner's shop with the regular business letters. I did nothing until you left Scotland, and then I took the rest of Opal's dowry and sold it to buy my wife's freedom. Call me a fool, but I still loved my Marguerite, even after all she had done.
What had she done? Papa, what happened to my mother?
Your mother was one of those who embraced absolutism, and she spied against the king and played a part in the rise of Napoleon. My Marguerite was paramount in his coup d'etat to seize political power in France. She had blood on her hands. Opal, so much blood.
Opal thought of his words to her after she had fired his pistol. Her hand went to her mouth and tears sprang to her eyes.
I do not understand, Papa. Was my mother a soldier?
A soldier?
Lord Hugo asked, unsure of what she was saying.
No,
Robert answered, understanding her question.
your mother flaunted her influence in a more womanly fashion to gain her bits of intelligence and assist Napoleon.
Oh, I see.
Lady Opal's eyes dried quickly as the shock rendered her unable to shed tears further.
Father, I think you should tell me all. I thought she died many years ago.
No, she did not. I am sorry, my child, but I had to lie to you. It was for your own protection. I would not have you know and end up involved. I was protecting you.
Protecting me?
Opal raised her voice at her father, anger evident in her every feature.
Lady de Dampierre,
Robert said formally.
Lord Hugo acted in your favour. Your father was right in this instance to keep you in the dark.
I refuse to listen to you, Colonel Booth.
She looked him up and down with fire in her eyes.
I thought you cared. I thought you loved me. I thought you were an honest man. It killed me to send you away. But now I am glad I did, and only ashamed that I offered you any amount of courtesy, for you deserved none. I should never have cared for you.
Opal turned away from him, clutching her handkerchief in a fisted hand against her delicate lips. Senor de Costa narrowed his eyes and watched Lady Opal. He was unsure of her true feelings at this moment, but one thing was clear. He was nowhere in her thoughts. He knew there was a prior acquaintance with the Colonel, and now it was beginning to be known. It pained him to think of his sweet French dove being ill-used by anyone, especially a soldier in His Majesty's army. Robert chose his next words carefully, eyeing the Dom as he spoke them.
Lady de Dampierre, they sent me to do a job, but was unprepared for the veritable angel I encountered. Upon observation and discussion with you and your honoured father, I reported neither of you was in contact with the Marchioness.
Oh, but I was.
Lord Hugo interjected.
As I said, I did nothing until you departed. After the British took Lady de Dampierre captive, they sent her to Bastille as a prisoner of war. I spent nearly every last coin we had to purchase her release, but she killed herself before I could arrange her freedom.
Opal was openly crying now, crying for the pain her father had suffered entirely unbeknownst to her, crying for the pain her mother had caused, crying for the lost years she should have had with a loving mother. She could hardly believe her mother had been alive as recently as 4 years ago. Lord Hugo rubbed his hands over his face and continued.
We had lost everything, but I could not let that be the end of Opal's hopes and dreams. Some time ago, I made copies of all the de Dampierre jewels. I did it for amusement, and then I thought I might use them as decoys to thwart thieves. I kept the imitations in a secret vault while the real jewel lived in that old chest. When all the real jewels were gone, I pretended the imitations were real. It was the only way I could think of to provide Opal with a suitable husband. The jewels were why I pressed so hard for you to marry before we left Aberdeen, my dear Dom André. I wanted to secure Opal's future, but you insisted on being married in Coiras. Then you announced you intended to stop in France and appraise the jewelry on our way to Portugal. I could not let it be discovered before the wedding that the jewels are nothing more than colored glass and paste. I told you I was afraid of boats, so that you would travel by land as far south as possible before boarding, thus avoiding the French port and giving me time to formulate a plan. I wanted to tell you the truth, but I was afraid. You kept insisting on observing that ridiculous family custom of the marriage depending upon the dowry. We live in modern times, Senor. The size of her dowry no longer gauges a woman's worth. Mr. Royse understands me.
Gregory nodded but said nothing.
My opal is worth 100 times 100,000 pounds, but I digress. Before our departure, I suspected that my opal had fallen in love with you. I was sure you would annul the engagement if you discovered the jewel were worthless. I took a chance, hoping that you loved her too, and that your sense of honor would not allow you to cast her off if her dowry was lost through means beyond anyone's control, and while she was under your protection. So I spoke to Mr. Tate, who owes me a debt, and he spoke to his brothers, and they agreed to help me stage a robbery. Forgive me, I did not know what else to do.
Silence, thick and heavy, hung in the air for what seemed an eternity. Senor de Costa spoke first.
I am appalled that you would deceive me in such a manner.
He stood and brushed at the dust on his clothing, though it made little difference to their state of utter ruination.
I trusted you and came all the way from Portugal to fetch Lady Opale de Dampierre and unite our families.
No one missed his formal use of Opal's title as he turned his back on her.
If you will excuse me, I need time to think.
Oh, Dom André, are you going to cast me off? I thought you loved me as I love you.
Opal, that is the one truth in this whole dastardly affair.
Senor de Costa turned around to face her.
This is why I have been so drawn and distant. Now that I have feelings for you, I feel guilty.
Guilty? Whatever for?
Opal asked as she gazed at him, still unsure whether he had just made a declaration of love. Truly, it was so difficult to tell. Senor de Costa ran his hand over his dishevelled hair and cast embarrassed looks at the large assemblage of Shaleslip inhabitants. Gregory turned to his servants and said,
Come, everyone inside. Senor de Costa needs to speak with Lady Opal alone.
Senor de Costa waited for the crowd to disperse before he said,
I too have a secret. I have deceived your father as he has me. I am not a rich man. Though my family is of royal descent, ours is such a minor branch of the ruling house that our titles are a courtesy and we have no fortune to speak of. I do not have a big fancy house like Shaleslip Manor. It is but a modest house on a poor plot of land hardly suitable for farming. I have worked tirelessly to make it into something more, but it is pointless, for I have a poor water supply. I have neither the money nor the knowledge necessary to make my farmland flourish. All of my holdings combined barely produce enough for me to live on. I thought my only chance to improve my situation was to marry for money.
When your father first wrote to me, I thought my prayers were answered. He had only a passing acquaintance with my father, you see, and he assumed my family was wealthy because of our title. I made no effort to correct his error, and I concocted that nonsense about family traditions to ensure he was not deceiving me concerning your dowry. I fully intended to marry you to secure your fortune to me before telling you the truth. But then, once I came to love you, I found it hard to deceive you in such a way. I tried to distance myself from you because I knew you would hate me for lying to you. I have felt so ashamed these past weeks that now I can scarcely look at you. I do not deserve you. When I saw you kissing the colonel, I thought it was no less than I deserved. God was punishing me for my selfish deceit.
You love me?
Opal interrupted his confession as she wiped a happy tear from her cheek.
Of course I do. Did you not hear everything I just said?
I heard you. I do not care one whit that you are poor. We are in love, and that is all that matters. Please say you will forgive my father and marry me, even without the dowry.
You would still have me?
I have never wanted anyone more.
In that case, nothing would make me happier.
Senor da Costa pulled Opal into his arms and kissed her, letting go of the restraint he had been keeping himself under. He kissed her passionately at first, and then his kiss turned tender and gentle, and she returned it as thoroughly as she knew how. Epilogue. Senor da Costa abandoned his air of disinterest in his fiancé and showered Opal with all the attention she could ever want, begging her to accompany him on his rides around the estate and taking her on long romantic walks through the Shaleslip gardens at sunset. Their love was everything Opal ever hoped it would be, and more. He told her the absolute truth about his home, his land, and its present limitations. Dom André expressed a fervent hope that the knowledge he had learned while inspecting the improvements Mr. Royse had made at Shaleslip may be the very answer to the prayers he had been sending to God about his land. Though Shaleslip was wet, where his was dry, the very principles of the system applied, and he knew exactly how he could adapt them to the needs of his land. Opal had only dim memories of her life in France, in the Marquis's grand former estate. In truth, most of the memories she had, she was unsure if they were accurate, as they were all based on stories her father had told her. All she really knew was a simple life of hard work and the satisfaction of earning one's own bread, and all she wanted was a husband who loved her as much as she loved him. She would help him work his land, and together they would build it up to be the home of their dreams. Even Lord Hugo agreed to help, so long as they forgave him and still allowed him to live with them, for truly he was penniless and reliant on their love and hospitality. Though Opal tried her best to convince Dom André to marry her right then and there in Shaleslip's beautiful chapel, he steadfastly refused. The one tradition he had not lied about was being married in Coiras. Though he longed to make Opal his own as soon as possible, his people really would not recognize the marriage, and his dear grandmother, who was old and frail and devoted to her grandson, would quite possibly die of shame. And so they set off as soon as the doctor permitted Lord Hugo to travel.
Remember, you are welcome in our home in Coiras, should you ever come to Portugal.
Senor da Costa said to the Royces as he handed his fiancée into the carriage and climbed in behind her. He deliberately did not look at Robert when he said it.
We cannot thank you enough for your gracious hospitality.
Thank you, Signor. That is most kind of you. Should your travels ever bring you back to England, you are always welcome at Shaleslip,
Gregory said. The footman closed the carriage door and hopped onto his perch. The entire party waved their farewells as the carriage rolled up the drive. When the visitors were finally out of sight, Marjorie returned to the house, and Robert turned to Gregory and said,
Now that nonsense is over and done with, what about our fox hunt? It was supposed to be tomorrow. You did not cancel it, did you?
Of course not. This hunt is not merely for pleasure and sport. We have to remedy a fox issue.
When will the others arrive?
This hunt will include the landowners from 3 neighbouring estates, the tenants, and the villagers from Shalebury.
The tenants and villagers?
Yes, we all agreed that under the circumstances, it would be a small pleasure we could afford the community who have all rallied this spring.
I am glad to hear it,
Robert said with a glint in his eye.
Why should that bring you so much joy?
It brings me so much joy because now the contest to bag the most foxes has little to no competition, and it will be a true battle of sportsmanship between you and me.
Robert had said his piece and stood to leave the room.
Now, if you will excuse me, cousin, I have an appointment with my new mare to ensure her familiarity with all the best trails.
It matters not. You will never best me.
Gregory goaded.
I care not,
Robert responded uncharacteristically.
If you bag more foxes, it will only be because I am riding an unfamiliar horse.
Gregory smiled and ordered the fox hunt to be assembled at dawn on the morrow. Then, offering his arm to Marjorie, he guided her back into Shaleslip Manor and closed the doors of the grand manor to enjoy the peaceful afternoon they had been robbed of 5 days ago. The end.